Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a question that has lingered at the edges of Warhammer 40,000 lore for as long as scholars and fans alike have pondered the stranger implications of the universe. It is a question born from the intersection of two of the galaxy's most powerful forces, one green and one golden, one savage and one supposedly divine. And that question is deceptively simple. What would happen if an orc, one of those hulking, bellowing, war-obsessed greenskins, genuinely came to believe that he was the emperor of mankind? Now, on the surface, this sounds absurd. It sounds like the kind of thing you might hear shouted across a crowded gaming table right before someone rolls a critical failure. But if you stop and think about it, if you really sit with this idea and let it breathe and take shape in your mind, you start to realize something unsettling. But in a universe where belief literally reshapes reality, where faith can ignite the dead back to life, and where the collective psychic energy of an entire species can make a rusted pile of scrap metal fire like a perfectly engineered weapon, this question is not absurd at all. It might be one of the most terrifying hypotheticals the galaxy has ever faced. To understand why, we need to unpack two enormous concepts and then smash them together like a pair of colliding battleships in the void. We need to understand the orcs and how their minds reshape the very fabric of existence. And we need to understand the Emperor of mankind, what he was, what he has become, and what the galaxy's belief in him has turned him into over 10,000 years of worship. Because when you lay those two ideas side by side, well, when you trace the threads of belief and psychic power and divine will, all the way to their logical conclusions, you arrive at a scenario so staggering in its implications that it could crack the foundations of the Imperium itself. So, settle in, get comfortable. Because we are about to take a very long walk through the darker corridors of the 41st Millennium, through smoke-choked battlefields and the humming depths of a greenskin horde, through the silent chambers of the Golden Throne and the screaming madness of the warp. And at the end of that walk, we are going to find something waiting for us that nobody expected. Not the Imperium, not the Chaos Gods, not even the orcs themselves. We are going to find a green-skinned god. Let us begin where all great stories of the orcs begin, with violence. Not organized violence, or strategic violence, or the kind of careful, calibrated violence that Space Marines practice like a martial art. No. Orc violence is something rawer than that, something more primal. It is the violence of a thunderstorm, the violence of an avalanche, the violence of a species that was literally designed from the cellular level upward to fight, to destroy, to revel in the crash and clatter and blood-soaked joy of combat. The orcs do not fight because they must. They do not fight to survive, though survival is a welcome side effect. They fight because fighting is what they are. It is encoded in every strand of their fungal DNA, burned into the genetic memory that the ancient old ones, those long-vanished architects of life, wove into the very building blocks of the greenskin species millions of years ago during the war in heaven. And here is the thing about the orcs that separates them from every other species in the galaxy. They love it. They genuinely, deeply and completely love every second of it. An orc waking up on a battlefield with half his arm missing and a crude axe embedded in his skull is not traumatized. He is not suffering from some form of shell shock. He is having the best morning of his life. He will rip that axe out, use it to chop the nearest enemy in half, and then bellow with laughter as he charges into the next fight with blood streaming down his face and a grin so wide it could swallow a moon. This is the species we are dealing with. This is the canvas upon which our hypothetical is about to be painted. And if you think that sounds like a poor foundation for something as nuanced and complex as a discussion about godhood and the nature of belief, then you have not been paying close enough attention to the orcs. Because beneath that crude, green-skinned exterior, beneath the bellowing war cries and the ramshackle technology and the seemingly endless appetite for destruction, there is something else at work. Something ancient, something powerful, something that makes the orcs not just the most dangerous Xenos threat in the galaxy, but potentially the most terrifying psychic force the universe has ever known. And it all comes down to belief. But before we get to that, before we dive into the shimmering green depths of the orc psychic gestalt and what it means for our hypothetical scenario, we need to ground ourselves in the basics. But we need to understand what an orc actually is, how their society functions, and why the galaxy has spent 10,000 years failing to stamp them out, despite throwing everything from exterminatus bombardments to full Space Marine chapter deployments at the problem. So let us talk about the greenskins. An orc is, at its most fundamental level, a weapon that grew legs and developed opinions. The old ones, those ancient beings who shaped the galaxy long before humanity crawled out of its caves on Terra, created the orcs, or their predecessors, the Krork, as a biological weapon system designed to fight the Necrons and the Star Gods, known as the Citan, during the unimaginably ancient conflict called the War in Heaven. Everything about the orcs flows from that original purpose: their biology, their psychology, their culture, their technology, and all of it traces back to a single design principle. These creatures must be able to fight endlessly and effectively with minimal infrastructure and no external support. The old ones achieved this through a staggering feat of biological engineering that makes even the Emperor's creation of the Space Marines look modest by comparison. Orcs are not purely animal. They are a hybrid organism, part fungal and part animal, with a cellular structure that incorporates something resembling photosynthetic algae throughout their bodies. This is why they are green. It is not war paint. It is not cultural affectation. It is biology. That green coloration comes from the same kind of biological processes that make plants green, and it gives the orcs a regenerative capability that borders on the miraculous. An orc can lose a limb and survive. Then an orc can take a bolt round to the chest and keep fighting. An orc can have its head cut off, and, provided a sufficiently skilled pain boy gets to it quickly enough with the right tools and a generous helping of what passes for anesthesia in orc society, which is usually a solid blow to the back of the skull, that head can be stitched onto a new body, and the orc will wake up complaining that his neck itches. This is not exaggeration. This is documented Imperial medical observation. The orcs are, pound for pound, one of the most durable biological organisms in the known galaxy. But durability alone does not explain the orc threat. Plenty of creatures in the galaxy are tough. What makes the orcs uniquely dangerous is how they reproduce and how they organize. Orcs reproduce through spores. When an orc fights, when an orc bleeds, when an orc dies, it releases microscopic fungal spores into the environment. These spores settle into the soil, into the cracks of buildings, into the organic detritus of the battlefield, and they begin to grow. First come the simplest orcoid life forms, the tiny squigs that serve as everything from food sources to pets to ammunition. Then come the snotlings, those diminutive, barely sentient creatures that perform the most menial tasks in orc society. Then come the Gretchen, the cunning little goblins who serve as servants, workers, and living shields for their larger cousins. And finally, growing largest and strongest of all, come the orcs themselves. This means that any world that has ever hosted an orc invasion is functionally infested forever. You can kill every single orc on the surface. You can burn the cities and glass the fields and declare victory with all the pomp and ceremony the Imperium can muster. But unless you catch every single microscopic spore, unless you sterilize the planet down to the molecular level, the orcs will be back. They will grow in the forgotten places, in the underhives and the cave systems and the abandoned industrial sectors. And in a matter of years or decades, the green tide will rise again. It is an infestation on a civilizational scale, and it is one of the primary reasons why the Imperium considers the orcs to be one of the most persistent threats to human survival. Now let us talk about how orc society works, because this is where things start to get interesting for our hypothetical. Orc society is brutally simple on the surface. The biggest orc is in charge. That is it. That is the entire political philosophy of the greenskin species. Might makes right. Strength equals authority. And if you disagree with the boss, your options are to challenge him to a fight or shut your mouth and do what you are told. The orc who sits at the top of this hierarchy is called a war boss. And the more successful and powerful a war boss becomes, the larger he physically grows. This is not a metaphor. Orcs literally get bigger as they accumulate power and status. A regular orc boy stands about 7 to 8 feet tall, already towering over the average human. A successful war boss can reach 10 feet or more, a wall of green muscle and scarred flesh festooned with the best weapons and armor his followers can provide. But beneath this apparently simple hierarchy lies a surprisingly complex social structure. The orcs are divided into clans, each with their own cultural identity and preferred style of warfare. The Goths are the most aggressive and combat-focused, favoring close-quarters brutality above all else. The Evil Sons are obsessed with speed, painting their vehicles red because they believe, with absolute and unshakable conviction, that red vehicles go faster. The Bad Moons are the wealthiest orcs, their teeth growing faster than those of other clans. Which matters, because orc teeth are the standard unit of currency in greenskin society. The Death Skulls are looters and scavengers, painted blue because blue is lucky. The Blood Axes are considered sneaky and underhanded by other orcs because they have been known to actually use tactics, a concept that most greenskins find deeply suspicious. And the Snakebites are traditionalists who prefer a more primitive approach to warfare, riding enormous beasts into battle and distrusting advanced technology. Within these clans exist the Odd Boys, those orcs who develop specialized skills through their genetically encoded knowledge. The knowledge is not learned, it is inherited, woven into the genetic fabric of the orc species by the Old Ones so long ago that even the orcs themselves have forgotten the origin. They call the Old Ones the Brain Boys, and have only the vaguest notion that someone, at some point, made them what they are. Mech Boys are the engineers, instinctively understanding mechanical principles at a level that would make an Imperial tech priest weep with frustration. They do not learn how to build things. They simply know. The knowledge bubbling up from deep within their DNA like water from a spring. Give a mech boy a pile of scrap metal and some wire, and he will build you a functioning vehicle. It might not be pretty. It might belch smoke and shake like it is about to tear itself apart. But it will work, and it will kill things. And that is all that matters. Pain boys are the surgeons, possessing an innate understanding of anatomy and medicine that allows them to perform feats of surgery that would be considered impossible by imperial medical standards. They can swap heads between bodies, replace limbs with crude bionics, and perform transplant operations that would make a skilled apothecary question everything they thought they knew about xenobiology. But the fact that pain boys are also deeply experimental and have a tendency to try unnecessary and often explosive procedures on unwilling patients is simply part of the experience. And then there are the Weird Boys. The Weird Boys are the psychers of the orc race, and they are the living conduits through which the most terrifying power in the greenskin arsenal flows. The power that makes everything else work. The power that turns junk into weapons and belief into reality. The power of the Gestalt psychic field. The orc Gestalt psychic field is one of the most fascinating and poorly understood phenomena in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. It is also one of the most powerful. And to understand what would happen if an orc believed it was the emperor of mankind, we need to understand this field in detail. Because it is the engine that would drive the entire scenario from idle curiosity to galaxy-shaking catastrophe. Here is how it works, as best as Imperial scholars and Mechanicus researchers have been able to determine. Every single orc generates a small amount of psychic energy. Individually, this energy is negligible, barely a flicker in the vast ocean of the warp. But the orcs do not exist individually. They exist in groups, in mobs, in hordes, in migration-scale crusades that sweep across entire star systems like a green tsunami. And when orcs gather in large numbers, when they start fighting and shouting and getting excited, all those tiny individual flickers of psychic energy begin to merge. They combine. They resonate with each other, building and amplifying like feedback in a speaker system, as until what emerges is something far greater than the sum of its parts. This is the Gestalt psychic field, and its effects on reality are profound and deeply unsettling. The most well-documented manifestation of this field is what it does to Orc technology. By any rational engineering standard, Orc technology should not work. Their guns are often little more than crude metal tubes with a trigger mechanism bolted on. Their vehicles are held together with wire, hope, and occasionally the actual bodies of smaller Orcs who got in the way during construction. Their spacecraft are ramshackle collections of salvaged Imperial, Eldar, and other alien hulls welded together into configurations that would make a naval architect have a nervous breakdown. And yet, all of it works. Not just works, but works devastatingly well. Orc weapons fire with lethal accuracy and stopping power. Orc vehicles roar across battlefields at terrifying speeds. Orc spacecraft achieve faster-than-light travel through the warp, something that should require incredibly sophisticated navigation technology and psychic guidance. All of this functions because the Orcs believe it should function, and their collective psychic field reaches out into reality and makes that belief true. This is not metaphor. This is not the power of positive thinking. This is a measurable, documentable psychic phenomenon that has been confirmed by Imperial researchers across thousands of recorded engagements. When an Orc picks up a gun that is, by every objective standard, a non-functional piece of scrap metal, and points it at an enemy while believing with every fiber of his being that it is a devastating weapon, the Gestalt field wraps around that belief and coaxes reality into compliance. The gun fires. The enemy dies. The Orc laughs and fires again. The Mechanicus Genitor. Lucas Anzion made a particularly telling observation in this regard. He noted that many Orc-built weapons will simply not function at all unless they are wielded by an Orc. Take that same gun out of green hands and put it in the hands of a human, and it becomes what it always was, a tube of scrap metal with some loose bits rattling around inside. The belief of the Orc is what activates the weapon, what bridges the gap between what the thing is and what the Orc thinks it should be. And it goes further than technology. The Orcs believe that painting something red makes it go faster. And so, red Orc vehicles measurably outperform identically constructed vehicles that are painted other colors. They believe that yellow makes explosions bigger. And so, yellow-painted Orc ordnance produces larger blast radii than the same explosive compounds without the paint. They believe that blue is lucky. And so Orcs wearing blue seem to survive engagements at statistically improbable rates. They even believe that purple is sneaky, the logic being that nobody has ever seen a purple Orc. Therefore, purple must be the sneakiest color of all. The circular reasoning is flawless by Orc standards, and more importantly, it works. Purple-painted Orc equipment does seem to attract less attention. Though whether this is a genuine psychic effect or simply a coincidence born from confirmation bias is a matter of ongoing academic debate among those Imperial scholars brave or foolish enough to study the greenskins. The implications of this are staggering when you think about them carefully. This is a species whose collective belief can alter the fundamental properties of physical objects. Color becomes a functional modifier of reality. Aesthetic choices have measurable mechanical effects. The line between imagination and physics is not just blurred for the Orcs, it is functionally erased, replaced by a psychic feedback loop, where what the Orcs think is true becomes true because enough of them think it. But, and this is a critical caveat for our hypothetical, the Gestalt field is not omnipotent. If it were, yet the Orcs would have conquered the galaxy long ago. They would simply believe they had won every battle, and reality would rearrange itself to make that the case. The field has limits. It works best on things that are close to being possible anyway. A gun that is crudely constructed, but has the basic shape and components of a weapon, is an easy target for the Gestalt field. It just needs a nudge, a psychic push to cross the line from almost functional to devastatingly effective. But a rock that an Orc calls a gun is unlikely to start shooting bullets, no matter how fervently the Orc believes it should. In more recent lore, the understanding has shifted to acknowledge that the more realistic the foundation of a belief, the easier it is for the field to amplify it. A competent mech boy who builds a genuinely functional device can channel more of the field's power into making it even better than it should be, while a purely delusional belief with no basis in reality gets much less traction. The field is also proportional. The more orcs there are in one place, the stronger it gets. A small warband generates a modest field that can keep their weapons firing and their vehicles running. A full-scale planetary invasion generates a field powerful enough to make impossibly large war machines function, and to allow feats of engineering that would be completely impossible without psychic assistance. And the theoretical maximum, a gathering of every orc in the galaxy, united under a single banner with a single unified belief, while is something that has never been achieved, but that keeps Imperial strategists awake at night in cold sweats. Because at that scale, the Gestalt field might be capable of almost anything. It is also worth noting something peculiar about the orc psyche that makes their Gestalt field especially potent. Orcs do not appear to suffer from cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that a human mind feels when trying to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time simply does not register for the greenskins. A vehicle with no fuel that is somehow still running? No problem. A weapon that has no firing mechanism but shoots perfectly well? Makes sense. An orc who is the emperor of mankind despite being a 10-foot-tall green-skinned fungal organism? Well, why not? If the orc believes it, he believes it completely, without reservation, without doubt, yet without the nagging internal voice that would tell a human that something does not add up. And that total, absolute, unwavering conviction is what gives the Gestalt field its power. Doubt is the enemy of orc psychic potential. And orcs do not doubt. They simply do not have the mental architecture for it. This brings us to the weird boys, the orc psychers who serve as living lightning rods for all this accumulated psychic energy. Unlike human psychers, who draw their power from the warp and risk demonic possession every time they use it, weird boys draw their power from other orcs. They are sponges for the Gestalt field, absorbing the psychic background noise that all those fighting, shouting, bellowing orcs generate, and channeling it into devastating displays of psychic force. And a weird boy in the middle of a large mob of excited orcs is like a pressure cooker with the valve sealed shut. The energy builds and builds, green sparks crackling around his head, his eyes glowing with barely contained power, until he either releases it in a controlled blast of psychic destruction, or his head explodes, often taking the heads of nearby orcs with it in a chain reaction of psychic detonation. This is not a pleasant experience for anyone involved, least of all the weird boy, which is why most of them live apart from other orcs when not on campaign, housed in raised structures built on copper stilts that help ground the excess psychic energy, like lightning rods channeling electricity into the earth. The most powerful and experienced weird boys, but those rare individuals who have survived long enough for their minds to become fully saturated with psychic energy, are called warpheads. These beings have moved past the terror and pain of channeling the Gestalt field and have become addicted to it. They ride the waves of psychic power like surfers on a green ocean, releasing catastrophic blasts of energy with gleeful abandon. A single warphead on a battlefield can melt tanks, vaporize infantry squads, and tear holes in the fabric of reality through which other orcs can travel instantaneously from one location to another. And all of this psychic power funnels upward toward the twin gods of the orc race, Gork and Mork. These are the deities of the greenskins, the divine embodiments of everything the orcs hold sacred. Can the orc species' collective unconscious registers in the warp, much as do the collective psyches of other intelligent species, like the Eldar or humanity. In the orcs' case, their relatively straightforward psyches coalesce into two entities that exist as genuine warp gods, fueled by the belief and psychic energy of countless trillions of orcs across the galaxy. The difference between Gork and Mork is, in classic orc fashion, simultaneously clear and completely confusing. Gork is brutal but cunning. Mork is cunning but brutal. What this means in practice is that Gork will smash you over the head while looking you in the eye, and Mork will wait until you are not looking before smashing you over the head. The distinction matters deeply to the orcs, who will cheerfully go to war with each other over which god is superior. But to outside observers, both gods are essentially the same thing viewed from slightly different angles. They are violence elevated to divinity, war given a face and a voice, and a pair of enormous fists. Gork and Mork are said to be among the most powerful entities in the warp. The orcs themselves believe that their gods are stronger than the chaos gods, stronger than the elder gods, stronger than anything else that exists in the immaterial realm. And while this is obviously biased, the sheer volume of psychic energy generated by the most numerous intelligent species in the galaxy does lend a certain weight to the claim. The orcs are everywhere. They breed without ceasing. They fight without stopping. And every moment of violence, every bellowing war cry, every belief that red goes faster and yellow hits harder, feeds energy into the warp and strengthens the twin gods who dwell in a region the orcs call the Great Green. Now hold all of that in your mind. The Gestalt field, the power of collective belief, the Weird Boys, and their ability to channel that belief into reality-altering force. The twin gods sustained by the psychic energy of trillions. Hold all of it, because we are about to introduce the second half of our equation. We are about to talk about the being whose identity an orc is going to claim for himself. We are about to talk about the Emperor of Mankind. The Emperor of Mankind is, depending on who you ask, either the greatest hero humanity has ever produced or the most catastrophic failure in the history of the species. He is the master of mankind, the Lord of Terror, the Carrion God, the Corpse Emperor, the Anathema, the Omnissiah, Art the Light of the Astronomicon, and about 1,000 other titles accumulated over a lifetime so vast that the word lifetime barely begins to describe it. He is the most powerful human psyker who has ever existed, an immortal being of almost incomprehensible power, and he has been sitting in the same chair for 10,000 years while the civilization he built slowly decays around him. To understand the Emperor, you need to go back a very long way. The most widely accepted origin story, though the Emperor's true history is shrouded in myth and contradiction, holds that he was born thousands of years before the current era, possibly as far back as 8,000 years before the common era of ancient terror. He was born a perpetual, one of those rare humans who cannot truly die, and from his earliest moments, yet he possessed psychic abilities that dwarfed those of any other human being. One version of the story says he was the collective reincarnation of thousands of ancient shamans who, sensing the growing danger of the warp, chose to pool their psychic essences into a single being of unmatched power. For millennia, the Emperor walked among humanity in secret, guiding and protecting the species from the shadows. He watched civilizations rise and fall. He witnessed the birth of the Chaos Gods in the depths of the warp. He saw humanity develop faster than light travel, colonize the stars, and then collapse into the horror of the Age of Strife, when warp storms cut the galaxy off from itself and plunged the human race into thousands of years of isolation and barbarism. And it was only at the end of this dark age that the Emperor finally stepped into the light. He emerged on Terra, united the warring tribes and nation-states of humanity's homeworld through a combination of diplomacy, manipulation, and overwhelming military force, and declared himself the ruler of all mankind. He created the Thunder Warriors to fight the unification wars on Terra, and when those wars were won, he replaced them with something better, something that would carry his will to the stars. He created the Space Marines. But first, he created the Primarchs, 20 demigod sons, each one a masterpiece of genetic engineering, each one designed to lead a legion of Space Marines in the greatest military campaign the galaxy had ever seen. The Great Crusade. A sweep across the stars that would reunite the scattered colonies of humanity under a single banner, exterminate or subjugate the alien threats that had flourished during humanity's absence, and establish the Imperium of man as the dominant civilization in the Milky Way. The Great Crusade was spectacularly successful for a time. World after world was brought into compliance. The orcs were beaten back at Ulanor in one of the largest military engagements in human history. The myriad alien threats that had colonized human worlds were purged. The Imperium expanded at a breathtaking rate, its borders pushing outward in every direction like the shockwave of an explosion. And then it all went wrong. The Horus Heresy, the betrayal of fully half the Emperor's Primarchs and their legions, a civil war so devastating that it fundamentally altered the course of human history and transformed the Imperium from a secular, science-driven civilization into a superstitious, fear-haunted theocracy. The details of the heresy are a story for another time, but the ending is what matters for our purposes. The Emperor confronted his traitorous son Horus aboard the War Master's flagship, and, in a battle that shook the warp itself, destroyed him utterly. But the Emperor was mortally wounded in the process, his physical body shattered beyond repair. He was placed upon the Golden Throne, an ancient device of immense power that had originally been designed as a portal into the Elder Webway. Modified into a life support system of staggering complexity, the Golden Throne has kept the Emperor's ruined body alive for 10,000 years. But alive is a generous term. He is more dead than alive, a withered husk of a man sustained by technology that the Imperium no longer fully understands, and by the psychic sacrifice of 1,000 psykers every single day, their life forces drained away to sustain the Emperor's failing body and his tireless psychic exertions. Because even in death, the Emperor works. His mind, though his body has all but failed, remains active in the warp, performing tasks that are essential to the survival of the entire human species. He powers the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that allows Imperial ships to navigate the warp and travel between the stars. Without the Astronomicon, faster-than-light travel would become functionally impossible for the Imperium, and the galactic civilization would fragment into billions of isolated worlds, with no way to communicate or trade or defend each other. He also holds shut the portal to the Webway that sits beneath the Imperial Palace, a breach torn open during the heresy by the well-meaning but catastrophic psychic intervention of his son Magnus the Red. If the Emperor's psychic focus wavered for even a moment, demons would pour through that breach and overwhelm Terra itself, the seat of human power and the symbolic heart of the Imperium. And perhaps most importantly for our discussion, the Emperor has become something he never wanted to be. He has become a god. This is the great irony of the Emperor's existence. He was a staunch atheist. He championed the imperial truth as a doctrine of secular rationalism that explicitly rejected the existence of gods and condemned religious worship as superstition and barbarism. He went to war to stamp out religion wherever his crusade found it. He punished his own son, the Primarch Lorgar of the Word-Bearers, for worshipping him as a deity. The Emperor wanted humanity to embrace science and reason, to evolve beyond the need for gods and faith and all the weakness and manipulation that came with them. And yet, over the 10,000 years since his internment on the Golden Throne, the Emperor has been worshipped as a god by trillions upon trillions of human beings. The imperial cult, the state religion of the Imperium, administered by the ecclesiarchy, has made emperor worship the central organizing principle of human civilization. Every citizen prays to the emperor, and every soldier fights in his name. Every world has its shrines and cathedrals dedicated to his glory. His image is everywhere, in stained glass and statuary, on coins and flags, and the hulls of warships, woven into the very fabric of human existence across 1,000,000 worlds. And here is the truly staggering part. That worship appears to be having an effect. In the warp, belief creates reality. The Chaos Gods were born from the collective emotions and psychic emanations of intelligent species. Khorne was born from rage and violence, Nurgle from despair and decay, Tzench from hope and ambition, Slaanesh from excess and sensation. These are not metaphysical abstractions. They are real entities, sustained and empowered by the continued emotional and psychic output of the living creatures in real space. And the Emperor, as sitting on his golden throne, sustained by the faith of trillions, has begun to undergo a similar transformation. The belief of humanity is not just keeping him alive, it is changing him.
Now, I want to take a quick pause here and just give you my honest take on this whole concept, because I think it deserves it. When I first started researching this topic, I thought it was going to be purely comedic. An orc thinking he's the emperor? That's funny, that's a meme. But the deeper I got into the lore, the more I realized this scenario is genuinely one of the most terrifying things that could happen in 40k. And that caught me off guard. The idea that the Gestalt field could hijack the emperor's own faith network, that belief doesn't care where it comes from or what species is generating it. That honestly kept me up thinking about it longer than I'd like to admit. It makes you reconsider everything about how divinity works in this setting, and I think that's what makes 40k so special as a universe. You can start with something that sounds like a joke and end up somewhere genuinely profound. But anyways, let's continue the video.
Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, who was revived in the late 41st millennium and met with the Emperor for the first time in 10,000 years, came away from that encounter deeply shaken. He described the Emperor not as the father he remembered, but as something else entirely, something vast and alien, and not entirely human anymore. The worship of trillions had not just sustained the Emperor, it was reshaping him into something new, something that might genuinely be a god, in the same way that the Chaos gods are gods, a warp entity sustained and defined by the collective belief of an entire species. This is the crucial detail that makes our hypothetical not just interesting, but genuinely dangerous. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, godhood is not an inherent quality. It is not something you are born with or achieve through merit. Godhood is something that is given to you by others, projected onto you by the collective psychic weight of billions of minds all believing the same thing. The Emperor did not choose to become a god. Trillions of humans made him one, prayer by prayer, candle by candle, sacrifice by sacrifice, over the course of 10 millennia. And the orcs have the most potent collective psychic ability in the entire galaxy. So what happens when an orc believes he is the Emperor? Let us find out. The story begins, as so many orc stories do, with a fight. But not just any fight. This is the fight that changes everything. Imagine a world on the edge of the Imperium, one of those forgotten agri-worlds or mining colonies that exist in the vast spaces between the major systems, barely significant enough to warrant a garrison and certainly not important enough for anyone of consequence to notice what happens there. This world has an orc problem. Not a catastrophic one, not the kind of full-scale invasion that draws Space Marine chapters and Astra Militarum regiments from across the segmentum. Just a persistent, low-grade infestation of feral orcs that have been growing in the deep forests and cave systems since some long-forgotten crusade scattered greenskin spores across the landscape centuries ago. These feral orcs are primitive by the standards of their species. They have no mechboys building spacecraft, and no organized clans with their distinctive cultures and colors. They are wild things, green-skinned savages, who fight each other as often as they fight the human colonists who share their world. They have crude weapons, stone axes and clubs studded with teeth, and they ride enormous beasts into battle with the howling abandon that all orcs bring to the act of violence. Among these feral orcs, there is one who is different. He does not have a name yet, not a proper one, because in feral orc society, names are earned through deeds, and this particular orc has not done anything remarkable enough to warrant being called anything other than "dat weird one" by the other members of his tribe. He is big, bigger than the other orcs in his band, which is typical for a potential leader. His skin is a particularly deep shade of green, and his eyes have a strange quality to them, a brightness that makes the other orcs uncomfortable when he stares at them for too long. He is strong, certainly, and he fights well enough to hold his position in the tribal hierarchy. But there is something else about him, something that sets him apart from the bellowing, brawling mass of his kin. he thinks. Not the low, instinctive cunning that all orcs possess, the natural tactical awareness that their creators built into their DNA. This is something deeper. This orc pauses before he acts. He studies his enemies before he charges. He looks up at the stars at night with an expression that, if you squinted hard enough and were generous with your interpretation, you might almost call contemplative. The other orcs find this deeply unsettling, and the tribe's weird boy, a scrawny, as twitching creature who lives in a cave filled with animal bones and strange fungal growths, has been muttering about bad juju whenever the big orc walks past. The weird boy can feel something radiating from this particular greenskin, a psychic signature that is subtly different from the normal orc background noise. It is stronger, for one thing, focused in a way that orc psychic energy usually is not. And there is a quality to it that the weird boy lacks the vocabulary to describe, a sense of reaching, as if this orc's mind is constantly stretching out towards something just beyond the horizon of perception. The fight that changes everything happens during a raid on a human settlement. The feral orcs have been growing bolder, their numbers swelling as new orcs mature from the spore fields in the deep forests. And the tribal war boss has decided that it is time to take some of the humans' things, specifically the shiny things. Orcs love shiny things. The raid goes badly almost immediately. The human settlement is better defended than expected. There is a small Astra Militarum garrison, just a platoon of infantry with a couple of heavy weapons teams. But for a band of feral orcs with stone weapons and no ranged firepower, it might as well be a fortress. The orcs charge in with their usual lack of subtlety and run straight into a wall of laser gun fire that shreds the first wave before they can close to melee range. The war boss, a hulking brute with more scars than brains, takes a last round through the eye socket and goes down like a felled tree. The other orcs, suddenly leaderless and taking heavy casualties, begin to waver. A few of the smaller ones break and run, which in orc society is considered the ultimate disgrace. Our orc does not run. He does not waver. Something is happening inside his head, something he cannot understand and cannot control. The noise of battle is fading, replaced by a ringing silence that seems to come from inside his own skull. His vision blurs, the battlefield becoming indistinct, and for a moment, just a moment, he sees something else entirely. He sees a golden light. It is not the light of the twin suns that hang above this dusty world. It is not the flash of last fire or the glow of burning buildings. This is something else, something that seems to exist in a place that is not quite part of the normal world. A light that pulses with a rhythm that feels like a heartbeat, steady and powerful and ancient beyond comprehension. And in that light, he sees a figure, a shape, a silhouette that burns with the brightness of a star, seated upon a throne of gold that stretches upward into infinity. The vision lasts only a fraction of a second. Then the battle crashes back into focus. The screaming and the lass fire and the smell of blood and smoke, and the orc finds himself standing in the middle of it all, with his crude stone axe raised above his head and a word forming on his lips that he has never spoken before. Emperor. He does not know what it means. He barely knows what words are, in the conventional sense, but the word burns in his mind like a brand, searing itself into the fungal neural pathways of his brain with an intensity that nothing else has ever matched. He heard the human soldiers screaming it as they fought. "For the Emperor!" they cried as they fired their weapons. "The Emperor protects!" they shouted as they fell. And something about that word, about the way they said it, about the absolute conviction in their voices when they invoked it, has struck a resonance deep inside this orc's psyche. A resonance that is now reverberating outward through the Gestalt psychic field like a stone dropped into still water. The other orcs feel it. They stop fighting, not because they want to, but because they physically cannot ignore the wave of psychic force that has just washed over them. They turn to look at the big orc standing in the middle of the battlefield, his eyes blazing with a light that is not quite green, and not quite gold, but something in between. And they feel something that orcs almost never feel toward another being. Awe. He charges. He and the orcs follow. Not because they have been ordered to, and not because the fleeing orcs have been rallied by a new war boss, asserting dominance through brute force. They follow because something has shifted in the Gestalt field, something fundamental and unprecedented. The psychic energy that usually manifests as a generalized desire to fight and win has suddenly acquired a direction, a focus, a purpose. And that purpose is radiating from the big orc like heat from a furnace. The garrison falls. The orc tears through the human defenses with a ferocity that surprises even his fellow greenskins, not because he is stronger or faster than he was 5 minutes ago, but because there is a quality to his violence that transcends mere aggression. It is purposeful, directed, almost. And this is a word that should never be applied to an orc, but there is no better one: regal. In the wreckage of the settlement, the orc finds what he was looking for, though he did not know he was looking for it until this moment. It is a shrine, a small, humble shrine of the Imperial cult, tucked away in a back corner of the settlement's communal building. There is a crude statue of the Emperor, carved from local stone by a craftsman of limited talent but unlimited devotion. The statue depicts a figure in ornate armor, seated upon a throne, with rays of light emanating from his head like the corona of a star. The orc stares at this statue for a long time. The other orcs cluster behind him, muttering nervously. They want to loot the place and move on. There are shiny things to collect, teeth to pull from the dead, or the normal post-battle celebrations to get on with. But none of them dare interrupt the big orc's contemplation, because the psychic field around him is pulsing with a power that makes even the most foolhardy orc think twice about drawing his attention. Finally, the orc reaches out with one massive green hand and picks up the statue. He turns it over in his fingers, studying the tiny carved face, the miniature throne, the golden paint that the colonists had applied with careful brushstrokes to honor their god. And then, with a certainty that comes from somewhere deeper than thought, deeper than instinct, deeper than the genetic programming of the old ones, the orc speaks. "That's me," he says. "That's me, on that chair." And the Gestalt field shudders. This is the moment, this is the seed, and to understand what grows from it, what we need to examine very carefully, what is happening on both the physical and psychic levels. On the physical level, what has occurred is relatively simple. An orc, stimulated by the stress of battle and the psychic residue of human faith lingering around the shrine, has experienced a hallucination or vision that his limited cognitive framework has interpreted in the only way it can. He saw a powerful figure on a throne. He heard humans screaming the word emperor with the kind of absolute conviction that resonates with the orc psychic field. And his brain, incapable of cognitive dissonance and primed by millions of years of genetic programming to see the biggest and most powerful being as the natural leader, has drawn the only conclusion that makes sense to an orc mind. If the Emperor is the biggest and most powerful being in the galaxy, and if this orc feels bigger and more powerful than anything he has ever encountered, then this orc must be the Emperor. On the psychic level, something far more complex and far more dangerous has occurred. The orc's belief, raw and absolute and untainted by doubt, has created a resonance in the Gestalt field that is unlike anything the field has produced before. Normally, the Gestalt field deals in practical matters. It makes guns work. It makes vehicles go faster. It reinforces the crude technology that keeps orc civilization, such as it is, functioning. But this is different. This orc is not believing in a thing. He is believing in an identity. He is claiming, with the total conviction of a mind that cannot doubt, that he is the most powerful psychic being the human race has ever produced. And the Gestalt field, that magnificent, our mindless, infinitely adaptable psychic force, begins to respond. The changes start small. Over the days following the raid, the other feral orcs notice that the big orc is different. He is bigger, for one thing. Orcs naturally grow in response to dominance and success, but this is faster than normal, as though his body is trying to catch up to whatever vision of himself is forming inside his mind. His skin, already a deep green, develops a subtle golden undertone that becomes more pronounced in certain lights. His eyes, which had always been bright, now glow with a faint luminescence that is visible even in daylight. When he speaks, which is still rarely and in broken, grunting sentences, the other orcs feel a compulsion to listen that goes beyond the normal deference shown to a dominant greenskin. The tribal weird boy is the first to really understand what is happening, and it terrifies him. He can feel the psychic field around the big orc changing, shifting, taking on qualities that should not exist in a greenskin's psychic signature. There is a warmth to it that is completely alien to the orc gestalt, which is usually characterized by aggression and competitive dominance. This warmth feels protective, encompassing, like the psychic equivalent of a massive hand shielding those beneath it from harm. It reminds the weird boy of something he felt once, years ago, when a human psyker had briefly been captured by the tribe before the war boss ate him. The human had radiated a similar quality, but weaker, diluted, a candle to what is now building around the big orc like a bonfire. The weird boy does not know the word for what he is sensing. If a human inquisitor were present, they would recognize it immediately and likely suffer a fatal cardiac event from the shock. What the weird boy is sensing, radiating from an orc, like light from a corrupted star, is faith. Not orc faith, not the rough, uncomplicated devotion to Gork and Mork that all orcs carry in their hearts. This is human faith, imperial faith, the psychic signature of billions of prayers offered to the God Emperor of mankind, somehow filtering through the gestalt field and manifesting in the aura of an orc who has decided, with absolute and unshakable conviction, that he is the being those prayers are directed toward. The implications of this are almost too large to comprehend, so let us take them one at a time. First, the orc is changing physically. His body is responding to his belief and to the gestalt field's amplification of that belief in ways that go far beyond the normal orc growth response. He is not just getting bigger, he is getting different. The golden undertone to his skin is not a cosmetic change. It is the physical manifestation of the gestalt field trying to make this orc's body match his internal image of himself. He believes he is the emperor. The emperor is depicted in golden armor with a radiant golden aura. Therefore, the gestalt field is attempting to turn this orc golden, but it does not stop at color. Over weeks and months, the changes accelerate. The orc's posture shifts, becoming more upright, more imperious, less the hunched forward lean of a charging greenskin, and more the straight-backed bearing of a commander surveying his domain. His voice deepens, thus losing some of the guttural quality of orc speech and acquiring undertones that seem to resonate in the chests of those who hear them. His eyes, already glowing, begin to emit actual light, a soft golden radiance that makes the shadows around him seem to retreat. Most disturbingly of all, the orc begins to exhibit psychic abilities that are completely outside the normal range for a greenskin. He can feel the thoughts of the orcs around him, not in the detailed way that a human telepath might, but as a general sense of intention and emotion that allows him to anticipate their actions before they take them. He can project his will outward, not just through the normal orc mechanism of being bigger and louder and more intimidating, but as an actual psychic force that wraps around the minds of those nearby and compels obedience. The weird boy, the only orc in the tribe with any capacity to perceive what is happening on the psychic level, watches all of this with growing terror. He can see the big orc's psychic aura expanding, reaching further and further from his body with each passing day, and it is not the green energy of the normal gestalt field. It is gold. Brilliant, burning gold, laced through with threads of green that crackle and spark where the two colors meet. It is as though two completely different psychic frequencies are being forced together inside a single being. And the result is something that the weird boy's limited understanding of psychic phenomena has no framework to process. But here is the thing that the weird boy cannot see, the thing that makes this scenario truly extraordinary. Remember what we discussed about the Emperor's nature. The Emperor of mankind, sitting on his golden throne on distant Terra, is sustained by the collective faith of trillions of human beings. That faith is a psychic force, a vast river of belief energy flowing from real space into the warp, where it sustains the Emperor's psychic presence and fuels his ongoing battle against the forces of chaos. Now consider what happens when an orc, amplified by the most potent collective psychic field of any intelligent species in the galaxy, genuinely believes that he is the Emperor. The Gestalt field does not know the difference between making a gun work and making a god. It does not distinguish between physical objects and metaphysical concepts. It responds to belief, pure and simple. And this orc's belief is as pure and simple as it gets. He is the Emperor. Yet he knows this with the same certainty that he knows green is the best color and fighting is the best thing to do. There is no doubt in his mind, no uncertainty, no room for the kind of philosophical questioning that would undermine the belief in a more sophisticated consciousness. And so the Gestalt field begins doing what it always does. It begins making the belief real. What follows is a process unlike anything the galaxy has ever witnessed. Over the course of months and then years, the orc who calls himself Der Emperor undergoes a transformation that defies every established understanding of greenskin biology and psychic phenomena. Driven by his own unshakable belief and amplified by a growing number of followers who share that belief, he becomes something that should not exist, something that no one predicted and no one is prepared for. The physical changes continue to accelerate. He grows, which is normal for a dominant orc, but he grows beyond the scale of any war boss that Imperial records have documented on a feral world with such a small orc population. He reaches 12 feet, then 15, his body filling out with muscle that is denser and more refined than typical orc physiology. His skin, now a deep green, shot through with golden veins that glow faintly in the dark, develops a texture that is smoother and harder than normal orc hide, almost like natural armor plating. His teeth, those emblems of orc wealth and dominance, grow with unusual regularity and symmetry, none of them broken or jagged, but instead forming a set that is, by orc standards, almost elegant. He begins to build, as not the crude structures of a feral orc camp, but something more ambitious, driven by instincts that are not entirely his own, that seem to come from the same place as the golden vision he experienced on the battlefield. He directs his followers to construct a throne, not from gold, because there is no gold on this dusty frontier world, but from the materials at hand. Stone and scrap metal and the bones of great beasts, assembled into a seat that dominates the camp from the highest point of the landscape. He sits in this throne when he is not fighting, looking out over the other orcs with those glowing eyes, and the Gestalt field pulses around him like a second heartbeat. The other orcs have begun to change as well, though in less dramatic ways. Their behavior is shifting, moving away from the normal chaotic infighting that characterizes feral orc society and towards something more structured, more organized. They are still violent, of course. They are still orcs, but their violence has acquired a direction, a purpose that it lacked before. They fight not just for the joy of fighting, but because the Emperor tells them to. They build not just for the satisfaction of building, but because Der Emperor wills it. And they follow, not just because he is the biggest, though he certainly is, but because something in the Gestalt field compels them to, with a force that transcends normal orc social dynamics. New orcs arriving from the spore fields, growing to maturity in the forests and caves surrounding the camp, are drawn to the settlement like iron filings to a magnet. But the psychic field around the Emperor has expanded to cover a significant area of the continent, and any orc who wanders into that field feels an immediate and overwhelming urge to find its source and submit to it. Not in the grudging, might makes right submission of normal orc hierarchy, but in something that more closely resembles devotion. The new arrivals do not need to be beaten into compliance. They kneel. they actually kneel, a behavior so un-orky that any Imperial scholar witnessing it would probably question whether they were looking at greenskins at all. The Gretchen are the most affected. These small, cunning creatures have always been the servants of Orc society, performing the menial tasks that the larger orcs cannot be bothered with. But under the influence of the Emperor's psychic field, does the Gretchen undergo a behavioral transformation that is almost as remarkable as their master's physical one. They become organized, efficient. They develop systems for distributing resources, maintaining equipment, and communicating across distances, using methods that are crude by Imperial standards, but astonishingly sophisticated by the standards of feral greenskins. One particularly clever Gretchen, a creature with beady eyes and an unusually large head for his body, begins keeping records. Not written records, because most Gretchen cannot write, but physical records, collections of knotted strings and carved tally marks that track the tribe's population, resources, and military strength. When asked why he does this, the Gretchen says, with an expression of confused sincerity, "The Emperor needs to know things, important things." Oh, that's how you run an empire proper like. An empire. The word sends a chill through anyone who considers its implications, because empires need administration, they need logistics, they need supply chains and communication networks and all the other infrastructure that supports organized civilization. And the Gestalt field, responding to the Emperor's belief that he is the ruler of an empire, is beginning to provide exactly that, channeled through the instinctive abilities of the Orc subspecies in ways that their creators never anticipated. The mech boys are building things they should not know how to build, structures that are not just functional, but almost architectural, with load-bearing walls and organized interior spaces and something approaching plumbing. Their weapons are becoming more refined, as less the crude hack-and-slash implements of feral orcs, and more the sophisticated firearms of their spacefaring cousins. Despite the fact that they have had no contact with other orc civilizations and no access to the usual channels of genetic memory activation that come with being part of a larger greenskin society, the Pain Boys are performing medical procedures of increasing complexity and decreasing lethality. Orc patients are surviving surgeries at rates that would be remarkable even in a fully developed Orc civilization. The crude bionics that the Pain Boys are fashioning from scrap metal are functioning better than they should, not just keeping damaged Orcs alive, but enhancing them in ways that suggest the Gestalt field is investing unusual amounts of psychic energy into making these medical interventions succeed. And through all of it, Da Emperor sits on his throne, growing larger and more luminous with each passing month, his psychic field expanding like a golden green dawn spreading across the landscape. He is becoming something unprecedented. Not quite an orc. Not quite the Emperor. Something in between. Something new. The first real test of this new power comes when the humans return. The Astra Militarum has finally noticed that the feral orc problem on this world has gotten significantly worse. The scattered reports from surviving colonists describe an unusually organized greenskin force led by a creature of tremendous size and apparent intelligence. The local planetary governor, after months of ignored requests for reinforcement, has finally attracted the attention of the subsector command. And a full regiment of Imperial Guard has been dispatched to deal with the situation. The regiment makes planetfall, expecting a routine Xenos clearance operation. What they find is something else entirely. The Orcs are waiting for them. Not scattered across the landscape in the disorganized mobs that feral greenskins typically form, but deployed in defensive positions that show clear tactical thinking. There are fortifications, crude but effective, constructed from local stone and reinforced with scrap metal, in patterns that Imperial engineers would recognize as structurally sound. There are kill zones, fields of fire, overlapping defensive positions, all the hallmarks of organized military planning that feral orcs should be completely incapable of producing. And at the center of the orc position, invisible from a distance because of the golden light that radiates from his massive form, sits Da Emperor. He is enormous now, easily 20 feet tall, a mountain of green muscle and golden-tinged flesh, seated upon a throne that has been rebuilt multiple times to accommodate his growing bulk. His eyes blaze with power, twin points of golden light that cast long shadows across the battlefield even in daylight. When he speaks, his voice carries across the field like thunder, a sound that reaches into the chests of the human soldiers and makes their hearts stutter. The regiment's commanding officer, a colonel with 30 years of experience fighting Xenos across 4 different war zones, takes one look at the Orc position and orders an immediate withdrawal to regroup. He has seen organized Orc forces before, or during the latter stages of his career on Armageddon, and he knows that what he is looking at is not a feral infestation. This is something far more dangerous. This is the beginning of a true gathering, the early stages of what could become a full-scale planetary crusade. He is wrong, of course. This is not a gathering in the traditional Orc sense, but what it actually is would frighten him far more than any conventional greenskin threat. The battle that follows is a disaster for the Imperial forces. Not because the Orcs are overwhelming in numbers, which they are not, or because their technology is superior, which it decidedly is not. The disaster comes from the Orcs' behavior, which is so far outside the expected parameters of greenskin warfare that the Imperial tactical doctrine, developed over millennia of fighting the greenskins, is rendered almost completely useless. The Orcs do not charge. They hold their positions. They wait for the humans to come to them, and when the Imperial forces advance, they encounter a defense in depth that channels their assault into killing grounds where concentrated Orc firepower can be brought to bear with devastating effect. The Orcs coordinate. Different mobs cover each other's flanks, something that should require communications equipment and training that feral Orcs do not possess. When the Imperial forces attempt to flank the position, they find that the Orcs have anticipated the maneuver and repositioned to counter it, moving with a speed and coordination that speaks to a unified command structure directing them in real time. That command structure is Da Emperor himself, sitting on his throne at the center of the position, in his massive form still and calm amid the chaos of battle. He is not issuing verbal orders. He does not need to. His psychic field, now stretching across the entire battlefield like an invisible web, connects him to every Orc in his force. He can feel their positions, their status, their readiness, and through that same field, he can send them impulses, not detailed tactical instructions, but broad impressions of intent that the Orc's instinctive understanding of warfare translates into coordinated action. Move there. Hold here. Attack now. The colonel, watching from his command post as his regiment is systematically dismantled by an enemy that is fighting like nothing in the Imperial knowledge base, does something that will have consequences far beyond this single battle. He sends a priority astropathic message to Subsector Command. The message reads in part, Orc forces displaying unprecedented tactical sophistication. Enemy commander appears to possess potent psychic ability. Recommend escalation to inquisitorial attention. Situation may represent new Xenos threat category. The Emperor protects. He does not know it. But those last 2 words, that reflexive invocation of the Imperial faith that billions of soldiers have uttered in moments of desperation across 10,000 years of war, land on the Gestalt field like a hammer blow. Because every time a human says, the Emperor protects, within range of Da Emperor's psychic field, the field interprets it as a statement about the Orc on the throne. And the field grows stronger. And Da Emperor grows more powerful. And the cycle continues, feeding on itself, building momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. The humans do not realize what they are doing. How could they? The idea that their prayers, their faith, their invocations of the God Emperor of mankind could be feeding power to a Xenos abomination is so alien to the Imperial worldview that it would be dismissed as heresy even if someone were brave enough to suggest it. But that is exactly what is happening. Every prayer, every battle cry, every whispered plea for divine protection is being intercepted by the Gestalt field, reinterpreted through the lens of Da Emperor's absolute belief in his own identity, and added to the psychic fuel that is transforming him from a large, unusual orc into something that is beginning to look disturbingly like a god. News of the anomaly on that forgotten frontier world does not stay contained for long. The astropathic message sent by the dying colonel, amplified by the terror and confusion of a veteran officer watching everything he understood about the enemy rewritten in real time, screams across the warp with an urgency that draws attention from multiple Imperial institutions simultaneously. The message lands on the desks of Ordo Xenos inquisitors, military strategists, ecclesiarchy archivists, and even a few tech priests whose areas of research include the more esoteric aspects of Xenos psychic phenomena. The initial response is skepticism. Feral orcs displaying tactical sophistication is unusual but not unheard of. Bloodaxe's clans have been known to employ ambush tactics and defensive positions that would surprise those who expect all orcs to simply charge headlong into the enemy. The suggestion that an orc warboss possesses significant psychic ability beyond what a weird boy might exhibit is more concerning but still falls within known parameters. Orc warpheads have been documented producing psychic effects of staggering power, especially when fed by the energy of a large gathering of excited orcs. But then the reports start coming in from the astropaths. Astropaths are among the most sensitive psychic instruments the Imperium possesses. Their minds are attuned to the currents of the warp in ways that even they do not fully understand. And when something unusual happens in the immaterial realm, they feel it the way a sailor feels a change in the wind. And what they are feeling now, emanating from the sector containing that forgotten frontier world, is something that makes several of them weep openly, and a few of the weaker ones collapse into unconsciousness. They describe a light, a golden light, burning in the warp, with an intensity that should not be possible from a source located on a minor world with no significant psychic infrastructure. The light is warm, they say, protective. It feels like the light of the Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon powered by the Emperor himself, but smaller and rougher and tinged at the edges with something green, something that does not belong. One astropath, an elderly woman who has served the Imperium for 60 years and whose reliability is beyond question, delivers her report in a voice that trembles with equal parts awe and horror. "I felt it," she says. "I felt the Emperor's light, but it was wrong. It was the same feeling. The same warmth, the same protection, but the source was corrupted, twisted, as if someone had taken the Emperor's grace and filtered it through an alien mind. It was beautiful, and it was an abomination, and I do not know which frightened me more." This report triggers an immediate inquisitorial response. An inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, a woman named Kathira Vane, who has spent 2 decades studying the more unusual manifestations of orc psychic phenomena, is dispatched with a retinue of specialists, including a librarian from the Silver Skulls chapter, 2 sanctioned psychers of considerable power, and a detachment of Militarum Tempestus stormtroopers. Their mission is to investigate, assess, and if necessary, eliminate whatever is producing the anomalous psychic signature. But Inquisitor Vane is not the only one who has noticed. Far away, in the eternal darkness of the warp, entities of ancient and terrible power are also paying attention. The Chaos Gods, those malevolent intelligences who feed on the emotions and psychic energies of mortal beings, have detected the anomaly as well, and their reaction is a complex mixture of confusion, contempt, and, in a few cases, something that might be called alarm. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the god of plots and schemes and manipulation, is the first to truly understand what is happening. His realm in the warp, the crystal labyrinth, where every possible future is reflected in walls of living glass, has been showing him visions of this orc for some time now. He has watched, with the kind of cold intellectual interest that is his defining quality, as the impossible unfolds. An orc claiming to be the emperor of mankind. The Gestalt field amplifying that claim into something that is beginning to take on genuine psychic substance, the threads of human faith being redirected, intercepted, woven into a new pattern that serves a new purpose. Tzeentch finds this fascinating in the way that a scientist finds a particularly virulent pathogen fascinating. He can see the potential. He can see where this might lead. And what he sees both intrigues and disturbs him, because if this orc's ascension continues unchecked, if the Gestalt field continues to amplify his claim to divinity, and begins to attract the faith not just of orcs, but of humans who might, in their confusion and desperation, mistake his golden-green aura for the light of their own god, then something unprecedented might occur. A new warp entity might be born, not a chaos god, not an Eldar deity. It's not a reflection of the Emperor's own growing divinity, but something entirely new. A god born from the collision of two completely incompatible belief systems, fueled by the most potent collective psychic ability in the galaxy, and wearing the face of the one being that the Chaos Gods have spent 10,000 years trying to destroy. Tzeentch cannot decide whether this amuses him or terrifies him, which is itself an unusual experience for the Lord of Change. Horn, the blood god, has a simpler reaction. He is angry. The orc is claiming to be a leader, a commander, a being who directs others to fight on his behalf. This is an affront to Khorne's fundamental nature. Blood should flow for its own sake, not at the direction of some jumped-up fungus pretending to be something it is not. But Khorne is also aware, as on the primal level at which the blood god operates, that the orc is generating an enormous amount of martial energy. The battles being fought under the Emperor's direction are producing violence and death on an escalating scale. And all of that feeds the warp in ways that ultimately benefit the Chaos Gods, whether they approve of the source or not. Nurgle watches with his usual patient melancholy, seeing in the orc's transformation a mirror of the Emperor's own slow decay on the Golden Throne. Both are beings trapped between life and something else, sustained by forces they cannot fully control. Nurgle finds this deeply satisfying in a cosmic sort of way, and is content to observe how the cycle plays out. Slaanesh barely notices. The orc's psyche is so alien, so utterly devoid of the complex emotional landscape that the Prince of Pleasure feeds upon, that it registers as little more than a flicker of discomfort on the periphery of Slaanesh's eternal pursuit of sensation. But it is what happens in the deeper levels of the warp that is truly significant. In the Great Green, that vast psychic territory shaped by the collective unconscious of every orc in the galaxy, something stirs. Gork and Mork, the twin gods of the greenskin race, are aware of their wayward child. They have felt the resonance in the Gestalt field, the unprecedented redirection of orc psychic energy toward a belief pattern that has nothing to do with their own worship. And their reaction is complicated. Because here is the thing about Gork and Mork that most Imperial scholars do not understand. How the twin gods are not possessive in the way that the Chaos Gods are. They do not demand exclusive worship. They do not punish apostasy. They are, at their core, simple beings who want two things: fighting and more fighting. And Da Emperor, whatever else he might be, is generating a truly spectacular amount of fighting. His growing empire is conquering surrounding tribes, fighting off Imperial retaliation attempts, and producing battles of increasing scale and ferocity. From Gork and Mork's perspective, this is wonderful. The specific theological framework under which the fighting occurs is, to the twin gods, a matter of supreme indifference. But there is a subtler dynamic at play. The psychic energy that the Emperor is channeling does not just feed Gork and Mork. It is being split, diverted, flowing partly into the Great Green as it always has, and partly into something new, a nascent psychic construct in the warp that is taking on qualities that are neither orc nor human, but some bizarre hybrid of both. This construct is still embryonic, formless, barely perceptible even to entities as powerful as the Chaos Gods. But it is growing, and it is drawing energy from a source that has never been tapped in this way before. The intersection of orc belief and human faith, two psychic wavelengths that should be completely incompatible, but that are being forced together by the sheer, stubborn, unbreakable conviction of a single green-skin mind. This is the nature of godhood in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and it is worth pausing here to consider its full implications for our scenario. Godhood in this setting is not a fixed state, as it is not something that exists independently of the beings who perceive it. It is a relationship, a feedback loop between worshippers and the worshipped, between believers and the object of their belief. The Chaos Gods exist because mortal beings feel rage and despair and ambition and pleasure. If every mortal being in the galaxy were to suddenly stop feeling those emotions, the Chaos Gods would fade. Not die, perhaps, because concepts are hard to kill, but diminish, weaken, become shadows of their former selves. The Emperor exists as a warp entity, to whatever extent he does, because trillions of humans believe he is a god. Their faith feeds his psychic presence in the warp, sustains his ability to power the Astronomicon and hold shut the webway breach and all the other tasks that keep the Imperium alive. Without that faith, as the Emperor would still exist, he was a being of immense power long before anyone worshipped him, but he would be something less than what he has become, something more limited, something that might, eventually, fail. Now consider der Emperor in this context. He is not a being of immense inherent power, like the Emperor was before the Golden Throne. He is an orc, a creature whose individual psychic potential is negligible. But he has something that the Emperor never had. He has the Gestalt field. He has the ability to draw on the collective psychic power of every orc within range of his influence, an ability that grows stronger with every new greenskin who joins his growing horde. And he has the one quality that the Gestalt field values above all others. He has absolute, unwavering, impossible to shake belief. The Emperor, for all his power, was plagued by doubt, not about his abilities, but about his purpose, his methods, the terrible choices he was forced to make in pursuit of humanity's survival. That doubt is part of what makes him a compelling figure in the lore, the tragic dimension of a being who was almost but not quite omnipotent, who could reshape reality with his mind, but could not prevent his own sons from betraying him. Der Emperor has no such vulnerability. He does not doubt because he cannot doubt. His mind is not built for it. He is the Emperor because he believes he is the Emperor, and that belief is as immutable and indestructible as a law of physics. You cannot argue him out of it. You cannot present evidence to the contrary. You cannot shake his conviction with logic or reason, or the simple fact that he is a green-skinned fungal organism who was spawned from a spore in a cave. None of these facts register as relevant to his self-concept, because his self-concept is not based on facts. It is based on belief. And in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, belief is stronger than fact. This is what makes the scenario so profoundly dangerous. Not the orc's strength, which is considerable but not unprecedented. Not his tactical ability, which is impressive but could be matched by other orc warlords throughout history. The danger lies in the theological implications of what he represents. He is a being who claims, with absolute psychic conviction, to be the Emperor of mankind, and who is backed by a psychic field that can make beliefs real. Every day that he exists, every orc that joins his growing empire, every battle fought under his banner, every human soldier who whispers, "The Emperor protects," within range of his field, adds to the psychic momentum of that claim. And at some point, if that momentum is not checked, the claim might become true. Not in the literal sense that an orc might physically become the Emperor of mankind, but in the psychic sense, in the warp, where belief defines reality, where the line between what a thing is and what enough people believe it to be is functionally non-existent. Der Emperor might achieve a form of divinity that is genuinely equivalent to the Emperor's own. A green god on a golden throne, a Xenos divinity wearing the face of humanity's greatest hero. An abomination so fundamental that it threatens the very concept of the imperial faith. Let us see what happens when he decides to leave his little frontier world and take his message to the stars. The moment comes sooner than anyone expected. The feral orc settlement has grown into something that can no longer be called a settlement. It is a city, rough-hewn and sprawling, built from stone and scrap metal and the bones of defeated enemies, but a city nonetheless. Its streets are patrolled by orc warriors who move with a discipline that would be recognizable to any imperial officer, if deeply disturbing to witness in a greenskin context. Its workshops ring with the sound of mech boys building weapons and vehicles of increasing sophistication. Its slave pens hold human captives who are not eaten, which is unprecedented, but put to work performing tasks that the orcs themselves are poorly suited for, as like reading imperial texts and explaining the symbols and rituals of the Imperium to their captors, because the Emperor wants to know. He wants to know everything about the being he believes himself to be. He wants to know about the Golden Throne, which the captive humans describe in trembling voices, while Gretchen take notes on knotted string. He wants to know about the Space Marines, the Primarchs, the Great Crusade. He sits on his throne, now a massive structure of metal and stone that dominates the city skyline, and he listens to the captive humans describe the Emperor of mankind with the patient intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. And with every detail he absorbs, the Gestalt field responds. The golden light that surrounds him grows brighter, but the psychic field that connects him to his followers grows stronger and reaches further. The nascent construct in the warp, that embryonic god form that is being shaped by the collision of orc belief and imperial faith, becomes a little more defined, a little more real, a little closer to the threshold of genuine existence. The human captives are, understandably, terrified. But a few of them, the weaker-willed ones, the ones who have been within the field's influence for months, and who have watched this impossible creature grow in power and apparent wisdom, begin to experience something that will later be classified by the Inquisition as one of the most dangerous forms of heresy ever documented. They begin to believe, not consciously, not deliberately. The rational parts of their minds know that this is a Xenos, an orc, as a creature that the Imperial Creed identifies as an abomination to be purged without mercy. But the deeper parts of their psyches, the parts that have been shaped by a lifetime of prayer and devotion, and the ingrained conviction that the Emperor is everywhere and in all things, those parts are responding to the golden light and the sense of protection and the overwhelming psychic presence that radiates from the creature on the throne. It feels like the Emperor. Not exactly, not precisely. There is a quality to it that is wrong, an alien undertone that grates against the human psyche like a stone in a shoe. But it is close enough, warm enough, powerful enough, that the deeper mechanisms of faith that have been hardwired into imperial culture over 10,000 years of religious conditioning begin to activate. As the captive humans begin to pray, not to the Emperor of mankind seated on the golden throne on Terra, but to the Emperor before them, the green-skinned giant who sits upon his throne of metal and bone, and who radiates a golden light that makes them feel safe in a way they have not felt since they were taken captive. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of the entire scenario. Not the orc's power, which is impressive but ultimately physical. Not the Gestalt field's ability to reshape reality, which is well documented and, in theory, could be countered by sufficient force. The true danger is the corruption of human faith, the redirection of the psychic energy generated by belief in the God Emperor away from its intended recipient and toward a Xenos pretender. Yes, because every human who prays to the Emperor instead of the true Emperor of mankind is withdrawing a tiny amount of psychic energy from the golden network of faith that sustains the Emperor on his golden throne and adding it to the growing reservoir of power that sustains the orc's claim to divinity. A few captive humans on a single world represent a negligible amount of redirected faith, but the principle is what matters. The principle is what makes the Inquisition's blood run cold when Inquisitor Vane's preliminary report reaches them. Because if this can happen with a few dozen captive humans on a forgotten frontier world, what happens when word spreads? What happens when other humans, desperate and afraid and searching for hope in the darkness of the 41st millennium, encounter this golden green light and mistake it for the Emperor's grace? What happens when entire populations, cut off from the Imperium by warp storms or distance or the simple grinding entropy of a decaying civilization, turn to the nearest source of divine light they can find, even if that source is green-skinned and covered in crude tattoos? The implications are enough to keep the entire Ordo Xenos awake for centuries. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before the galaxy can grapple with these implications, the Emperor must first leave his world, and that requires something that no feral orc should be able to produce: a spaceship. The mech boys have been working on it for months, driven by an imperative that comes not from their normal genetically encoded technological instincts, but from something deeper. As something beamed into their minds through the Gestalt field by a creature who has learned from his captive humans that the Emperor rules a domain that stretches across the stars. The Emperor does not sit on a single world. The Emperor's reach is galactic, and if the Emperor is the Emperor, then his reach must be galactic too. The ship that the mech boys produce is, by any standard of naval architecture, a monstrosity. It is built from the wreckage of the crashed transport ships that originally brought the human colonists to this world, combined with native materials and orc engineering principles that rely more on enthusiasm than precision. It is enormous, ugly, asymmetrical, covered in crude symbols that are half orc glyphs and half bastardized imperial iconography. A massive image of the Emperor has been painted on the prow, but the Emperor in this image has green skin and tusks and is wielding a gigantic axe in one hand and what appears to be a golden scepter in the other. By every rational assessment, this ship should not fly. It should not be able to achieve orbit, let alone navigate the void between stars. Its engines are a hodgepodge of salvaged Imperial technology and orc innovation that should not produce thrust. Its hull should not be airtight. Its navigational systems, such as they are, should not be able to plot a course through the warp. But the Emperor believes it will work, and so it works. The ship lifts off from the planet's surface with a roar that shakes the mountains and a plume of exhaust that is, characteristically, both green and gold. Inside, thousands of orcs are packed into compartments and corridors, armed to the teeth and thrumming with anticipation. They do not know where they are going. They do not care. The Emperor is going to the stars, and they are going with him, because that is what you do when the biggest, brightest, most powerful being you have ever known tells you it is time to go. The warp journey is, by all accounts, impossibly smooth. The ship should be torn apart the moment it enters the immaterial realm. It has no Geller field, that critical piece of technology that protects Imperial ships from the predations of warp entities. It has no navigator, those mutant humans whose third eye allows them to chart a course through the warp's constantly shifting currents. It has nothing but a weird boy strapped to the front of the ship like a living figurehead, his brain buzzing with more psychic energy than any weird boy has ever survived containing, and the golden green light of the Emperor's psychic field wrapping around the ship like a protective cocoon. The demons of the warp see the ship and they approach, drawn by the concentration of psychic energy like sharks to blood. But when they encounter the field that surrounds it, they recoil. The field is hot, bright, infused with a psychic frequency that is painful for entities of the warp to endure. It is the same frequency as the Emperor's own psychic light, the light of the Astronomicon, the light that has kept the forces of chaos at bay for 10 millennia. But it is not the Emperor's light. It is something born from the same source, but filtered through a completely alien consciousness. A green fire burning with golden intensity, and the demons do not know what to make of it. A Lord of Change, one of Tzeentch's greater demons, attempts to breach the field and is hurled back with such force that it is temporarily unmade, its essence scattered across the local warp space like a shattered mirror. The psychic shockwave from this event draws the attention of other warp entities, and for a brief, unprecedented moment, a corridor of relative calm opens in the immaterial realm around the Orc ship, as though the warp itself is flinching away from the thing traveling through it. The ship emerges into real space intact, its crew alive, its cargo of thousands of armed and excited Orcs ready for whatever comes next. They have arrived in a system with 3 inhabited worlds, all of them Imperial. None of them are expecting an Orc invasion, and none of them have any idea what they are actually dealing with. What follows over the next several decades is a story of expansion and conquest that mirrors, in its broad strokes, the Emperor's own great crusade, though the details are unmistakably Orc. Der Emperor does not simply invade worlds. He conquers them with a purpose. Orc populations on neighboring worlds, feral tribes and established settlements alike, are drawn to his banner by the irresistible pull of the Gestalt field, which now broadcasts across interstellar distances through mechanisms that no one, not even the Mechanicus, can fully explain. Human populations are not exterminated, but subjugated, put to work supporting the growing Greenskin Empire in ways that mirror, in crude and disturbing fashion, the structure of the Imperium itself. There are tithes, there are governances, there is a bureaucracy, if you can call a system run by unusually literate Gretchen with knotted string calculators a bureaucracy. Der Emperor is not content to simply fight and move on. He builds, he establishes, he creates something that has structure and permanence and a continuity of purpose that should be completely alien to the Orc species. He calls it his Empire, and every time he says the word, the Gestalt field trembles. The Imperium's response to the emerging threat is hampered by several factors. First, the scale of the problem is not immediately apparent. Orc invasions are common. Orc empires rise and fall with depressing regularity, and most Imperial strategists assume that this one will collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions within a few years, as most Orc empires do. The infighting that typically destroys Orc civilizations is expected to kick in at any moment, shattering the Horde into a dozen competing factions that can be dealt with individually. But the infighting never comes. Der Emperor's psychic field, that golden-green web of belief and power that connects him to every Orc under his command, suppresses the normal factional tendencies of greenskin society. Not by eliminating them entirely, because you cannot change 65 million years of engineered behavior overnight, but by channeling them. The Orcs still fight each other, but they fight in structured competitions, organized bouts that serve to determine hierarchy within the framework of Der Emperor's empire, rather than tearing it apart. It is, in its grotesque way, remarkably similar to the tournament culture that some Imperial knight houses practice among themselves. Second, the few Imperial forces that have engaged the Orc Empire and survived to report their experiences have a very hard time explaining what they saw without sounding insane. The Orcs are organized is a sentence that Imperial commanders can accept, if reluctantly. The Orcs are building a functioning civilization pushes the boundaries of credibility. The Orcs are worshipping a leader who claims to be the Emperor and who radiates a psychic signature that feels like the Emperor's own light, is the kind of statement that gets the speaker referred for psychological evaluation and possible execution for heresy. Third, and most critically, the ecclesiarchy is deeply conflicted about how to respond. The reports describe an entity that claims to be the Emperor, radiates the Emperor's psychic signature, and is establishing an empire modeled on the Imperium itself. To the more fanatical elements of the ecclesiarchy, this is a blasphemy of the highest order, a Xenos abomination that must be destroyed with fire and fury and every weapon the Imperium possesses. But to the more thoughtful theologians, the ones who have spent their lives studying the nature of the Emperor's divinity and the relationship between faith and psychic power, the reports raise questions that they are not sure they want answered. Because if an orc can become a vessel for the Emperor's psychic frequency simply by believing hard enough, what does that say about the nature of the Emperor's divinity itself? Is the Emperor a unique being, or is he a pattern, a template, and a psychic frequency that can be reproduced by any consciousness that believes in it strongly enough? Is the Emperor because of who he is, or because of what others believe he is? These are questions that the ecclesiarchy has spent 10,000 years carefully not asking, and the emergence of Da Emperor is forcing them to the surface with all the subtlety of an orc charging into a cathedral. Inquisitor Vane arrives in the theatre of operations with her full retinue and immediately begins gathering intelligence. What she finds confirms her worst fears and adds new dimensions to the crisis that she had not anticipated. The Orc Empire, which the Inquisition is internally designating as the Viridian Heresy, has expanded to encompass 14 worlds across 3 star systems. Its population includes approximately 2 billion orcs, 3 billion Gretchen and Snotlings, and most alarmingly, 700 million humans who have been integrated into the Empire's structure as laborers, administrators, and, in increasing numbers, willing participants in the nascent religion that has grown up around the Emperor. The human population presents the greatest concern. Imperial doctrine is clear on the treatment of humans who have willingly submitted to Xenos rule. They are traitors, heretics, and their fate is execution. But the sheer number of affected humans, combined with the genuine difficulty of distinguishing between those who were coerced and those who chose to participate, makes a simple purge logistically and politically challenging. Moreover, the psychers in Vane's retinue have confirmed the initial astropathic reports. The Emperor does radiate a psychic signature that is uncomfortably similar to the Emperor's own. Not identical, there is an alien quality to it that trained psychers can detect, but close enough that untrained humans, the vast majority of the Imperium's population, cannot tell the difference. Vane's librarian, a stern silver skull named Thalor, provides the most detailed psychic assessment. He reports that Da Emperor's aura in the warp is unlike anything in his experience or in the chapter's archives. It is not an orc psychic signature. It is not a human psychic signature. It is something new, a hybrid frequency that combines elements of both in ways that should be physically impossible. The golden light is genuine psychic energy of the type associated with the Emperor's presence, but it is being generated through orc biological and psychic mechanisms, filtered through the Gestalt field, and projected with a power and clarity that no single orc, no matter how potent a weird boy, should be able to produce. Thalor's conclusion is delivered in the flat, emotionless tone of a space marine confronting an unpleasant truth. This entity is not the Emperor, but it is producing effects that are, in practical terms, indistinguishable from the Emperor's influence. If we cannot determine whether this is a genuine manifestation of divine will or a psychic aberration, then we have a problem that goes far beyond a simple Xenos incursion. We have a theological crisis. The word theological hangs in the air of the briefing room like a blade. Meanwhile, far away, on Holy Terror itself, something happens that will not be understood or even noticed for many years to come. In the depths of the Imperial Palace, in the sanctum where the Golden Throne sits surrounded by the constant chanting of thousands of tech priests and the psychic screaming of sacrifice psychers, a needle on a monitoring device twitches, just slightly, just for a moment. One of the thousands of instruments that track the Emperor's psychic output, a device that has shown a steady and slowly declining reading for 10,000 years, registers a momentary fluctuation. The tech priest monitoring that particular device notes the anomaly in his log with the notation possible instrumentation error and moves on. While he does not connect the fluctuation to reports of an anomalous psychic signature in a distant sector, he has no reason to. The idea that something happening on a minor orc-infested world could affect the readings of the Golden Throne itself is so absurd that it does not even occur to him as a possibility. But the fluctuation was not an error. For the briefest of moments, something touched the vast psychic network that connects the Emperor to the Imperium, something that broadcast on the same frequency as the Emperor's own light. that resonated with the Astronomican's beacon in a way that caused a sympathetic vibration in the Golden Throne's instruments, something that, for the span of a heartbeat, drew the Emperor's attention. What the Emperor thought in that moment, when if a being trapped in a state of perpetual agony and psychic exertion for 10,000 years can be said to think in any way that would be recognizable to mortal consciousness, is unknowable. The Emperor's mind is vast and alien, and operates on scales that would shatter a human psyche. But something registered, something was noted, and somewhere in the labyrinthine depths of the most powerful human mind ever to exist, a new variable was added to the calculations that the Emperor performs every second of every day to keep the Imperium alive. A green variable, a golden green variable, a variable that should not exist, and yet, stubbornly, impossibly, and with the unshakable conviction of an orc who knows exactly who he is, does.
The climax of our scenario arrives not as a single battle, but as a convergence of forces that the galaxy has never seen before. The Imperium has finally committed serious resources to dealing with the Viridian heresy, deploying a full battle group including elements of 3 Space Marine chapters, 24 Astra Militarum regiments, a significant inquisitorial force, and, in a move that underscores how seriously the threat is being taken, a detachment of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's own personal guard. The Custodes have been sent not to fight the orcs, though they will certainly do so if required, but to investigate the theological implications of the anomaly. The Captain General of the Custodian Guard has been briefed on the situation, and his response was characteristically measured and characteristically terrifying. If this entity truly resonates on the Emperor's frequency, he said, then its existence poses questions about the nature of the Master of Mankind that must be answered. And if those answers are unacceptable, then the entity must be erased so thoroughly that no memory of it survives. Der Emperor, for his part, is ready for whatever comes. His empire now encompasses 37 worlds, and his horde numbers in the tens of billions. The gestalt field that surrounds him has grown to the point where it can be detected by astropaths across an entire segmentum, a golden-green beacon in the warp that burns with an intensity that rivals some of the lesser imperial shrines. His physical form has continued to evolve, and he now stands over 30 feet tall, a towering colossus of green muscle and golden light whose mere presence on a battlefield can root enemy formations through sheer psychic intimidation. But the most dramatic changes have been internal. Der Emperor is no longer just a large orc with a god complex. He is something genuinely unprecedented. His mind, shaped by years of absorbing information about the Emperor of Mankind from captive humans and captured imperial texts, has expanded far beyond the normal cognitive limits of an orc brain. He thinks in long-term strategies. He considers the implications of his actions across decades and centuries. He has developed something that would, in any other being, be called wisdom, a quality that should be completely impossible for a creature whose species was designed for short-term tactical thinking and nothing else. And his psychic abilities continue to grow. He can project his consciousness across interstellar distances, touching the minds of his followers on distant worlds and directing their actions with a precision that puts the Imperium's own astropathic communication network to shame. He can heal the wounded with a touch, not through any medical process, but through the sheer psychic force of belief, the gestalt field knitting flesh and bone and metal together in response to his will. He can look into the warp and see things there, shapes and patterns and possibilities that no orc should be able to perceive. The weird boys who serve him have been transformed as well. No longer the terrified, twitching creatures they once were, they have become something closer to the psychers of the Imperial system, are disciplined and focused, and capable of wielding the gestalt field's energy with a precision that would make a Space Marine librarian uncomfortable. They serve as his communication network, his intelligence service, and his artillery, channeling his will across the battlefield with an efficiency that transforms the normally chaotic orc combat style into something approaching military discipline. The confrontation, when it comes, is unlike any battle in the recorded history of the Imperium. It takes place on a world called Thuros Minoris, a forge world that Da Emperor has targeted for conquest because his growing empire needs the industrial capacity that only a heavily developed imperial world can provide. The imperial forces have been waiting for him, having correctly anticipated his strategic objectives through a combination of intelligence analysis and the simple logic that an expanding empire needs resources to sustain itself. The battle lines are drawn. On one side, the full might of an imperial crusade, space marines in their power armor, imperial guard regiments in their trenches, titans striding across the landscape like gods of war, the golden gleam of the custodes standing ready at the center of the imperial position. On the other, the green tide of Da Emperor's horde, billions of orcs in crude but effective armor, their vehicles roaring and their weapons blazing, their weird boys channeling the Gestalt field into shields and blasts and other manifestations of psychic force. And at their center, seated upon a mobile throne that is half command vehicle and half sacred relic, Da Emperor himself, a mountain of green and gold power whose psychic presence fills the sky like a second sun. The battle is brutal, as all battles in the 41st millennium are. The Imperial forces have the advantage in technology and training. The orcs have the advantage in numbers and psychic power. The fighting seesaws back and forth across the Forge World's industrial landscape for weeks, then months, with neither side able to achieve a decisive breakthrough. The Space Marines' tactical superiority is offset by the orcs' unnatural coordination. The Imperial Guard's firepower is matched by the Gestalt field's ability to keep damaged orc vehicles and weapons functioning long past the point when they should have been reduced to scrap. The Titans inflict horrific casualties on the orc horde, but the horde simply absorbs the losses and keeps coming, replenished by new orcs arriving from across the Empire in a steady stream of reinforcements. It is the Custodes who make the difference, not through their combat prowess, though that is formidable, but through what they learn when they finally come within range of Da Emperor's psychic field. The shield captain leading the custodian detachment is a warrior named Valdris, who has served the Emperor for over 1,000 years and who has stood in the presence of the Golden Throne more times than most humans stand in the presence of daylight. He knows what the Emperor's psychic aura feels like. He has bathed in it. He has drawn strength from it. It is as familiar to him as the weight of his guardian spear. And when he enters Da Emperor's field, when the golden green light washes over him for the first time, Valdris feels something that shakes him to the foundation of his being. It is not the Emperor's aura. He can tell that immediately, with the certainty of a sommelier distinguishing between two different vintages. The texture is wrong. The frequency is slightly off. The emotional quality that underlies the psychic signature is alien in a way that no human faith could produce. But it is close, closer than anything Valdris has ever encountered. Closer than the psychic signatures of the living saints, those miraculous beings raised from death by the Emperor's will. Closer than the resonance of the most holy relics in the Imperium's possession. So close that Valdris understands, with a soldier's pragmatism, why so many humans have been deceived. And so close that he also understands, with a guardian's horror, why this thing must be destroyed. Because if it is not destroyed, if it is allowed to continue growing and spreading and accumulating the faith of both orcs and humans, then it will eventually reach a tipping point. A moment where the psychic construct it is building in the warp becomes self-sustaining, no longer dependent on Da Emperor's personal belief, but fed by the collective faith of billions of orcs and millions of humans. A new god wearing the Emperor's face, but serving no one's purpose but its own. And at that point, the damage to the imperial faith, to the network of belief that sustains the true Emperor on the Golden Throne, could be catastrophic. Every human who prays to the false Emperor instead of the true one is a thread pulled from the golden fabric that keeps the Imperium alive. Pull enough threads and the fabric tears. And if the fabric tears, the Astronomicon flickers. The webway breach weakens. The demons press closer. The Imperium dies. This is not a war for territory or resources. This is a war for the soul of the Imperium itself. The resolution of the conflict is, like all things in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, ambiguous and unsatisfying. The Imperium wins the battle on Thuros Minoris, but at a cost that makes victory a generous term. Entire regiments are destroyed. Space Marines fall in numbers that will take decades to replace. The Forge world itself is so badly damaged that its industrial output is reduced by over 60%, a loss that will ripple through the sector's economy for centuries. And the Emperor survives. The Custodes strike force reaches his position and engages him directly, and the battle that follows is so psychically intense that astropaths across the segmentum report headaches and nosebleeds from the psychic backwash. Valdris himself duels the Orc, Golden Guardian Spear against Golden Green Psychic Power, and for a moment, just a moment, the two combatants lock eyes and something passes between them that neither will ever fully understand. Then the moment passes, and Da Emperor retreats. Not because he has been defeated, though he has taken grievous wounds, but because something in the Gestalt field has shifted. The massive expenditure of psychic energy required to fight a custodian guard at close range has temporarily disrupted the field's coherence, and without that coherence, the normal Orc tendency toward disorganization begins to reassert itself. Mobs break away from the main force. Sub-commanders start fighting each other. The Empire's flawless coordination shatters into the familiar chaos of Orc infighting. Da Emperor gathers what remains of his personal guard and breaks through the Imperial encirclement in a fighting retreat that, despite everything, is conducted with a discipline and efficiency that the Imperial commanders will study for years afterward. He disappears into the void, his battered fleet scattering across multiple systems, and the Imperium declares the crisis resolved. But it is not resolved. Da Emperor is still out there, somewhere in the darkness between the stars, healing and rebuilding, and believing with the same absolute, unshakable conviction that started this whole impossible chain of events. The Gestalt field, disrupted but not destroyed, is slowly rebuilding itself around him. The Orcs who scattered during the battle are being drawn back, one by one, and then in groups, and then in mobs, following the golden-green light that still burns in the warp like a beacon. And the construct, that nascent godform in the warp that was born from the collision of Orc belief and Imperial faith. It was damaged in the battle, diminished, but not destroyed. It still exists, a formless potential waiting to be shaped, a question mark hanging in the immaterial realm that the universe has not yet answered. Will Da Emperor return? Almost certainly. The Orcs always come back. It is what they were designed to do. And this Orc, this impossible, unprecedented, theology-shattering Orc, has more reason to come back than any war boss in the history of the species. He has an empire to rebuild, a crusade to complete, a galaxy to claim, and he has a throne to sit on. The implications of our scenario extend far beyond a single Orc's delusion of grandeur. They reach into the deepest questions that the Warhammer 40,000 universe asks about the nature of belief, power, and divinity. In a universe where gods are created by the faith of their worshippers, what happens when the most psychically potent species in the galaxy turns its belief toward an unexpected target? In a civilization built entirely on the worship of one being, well, what happens when a Xenos claims that being's identity and radiates a psychic signature that is functionally indistinguishable from the original? The answer, we have seen, is chaos. Not the chaos of the dark gods, though they are certainly interested in the outcome. A different kind of chaos. The chaos of certainty undermined, of foundations questioned, of a galaxy-spanning faith confronted with a mirror that shows it something it does not want to see. Because the existence of the Emperor forces the Imperium to ask a question it has been avoiding for 10,000 years. Is the Emperor divine because of who he is, or because of what others believe he is? If belief alone can create divinity, if faith alone can generate a psychic signature indistinguishable from the Emperor's own light, then the Emperor's divinity is not inherent. Thus it is granted, sustained, conditional upon the continued faith of trillions, and anything that is conditional can, in theory, be transferred. This is the true horror of our scenario. Not the green skin, not the tusks, not the crude weapons and the bellowing war cries. The true horror is theological. It is the realization that in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, godhood is not a birthright. It is a currency. And like all currencies, it can be counterfeited. The ecclesiarchy will never acknowledge this. They cannot. To do so would be to undermine the foundation upon which the entire Imperium rests. The Emperor is divine because he is the Emperor. He is unique, irreplaceable. His light is his, and his alone. Any suggestion otherwise is heresy of the most dangerous kind, and those who voice it will be silenced with extreme prejudice. But in the quiet hours, in the private moments when even the most fanatical theologians allow themselves to think uncomfortable thoughts, the question lingers. If an orc can believe hard enough to generate the Emperor's light, what does that say about the light itself? What does that say about the Emperor? What does that say about faith? These are questions without answers, which is exactly as it should be in a universe defined by ambiguity and darkness, and the eternal, grinding war between belief and reality. The Warhammer 40,000 universe does not offer clean resolutions or comfortable truths. It offers only the endless struggle, the eternal question, and the grim certainty that somewhere, in the vast darkness between the stars, something is always watching, something is always believing, and something is always becoming more than it was. Der Emperor is out there, somewhere, growing, believing, becoming, and the galaxy, whether it knows it or not, will never be quite the same. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And now, impossibly, there might be two emperors fighting it. One golden, one green, and neither one of them is going to stop believing. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the strangest and most thought-provoking hypotheticals the Warhammer 40,000 universe has to offer. If you enjoyed this exploration, if it made you think about the nature of belief and power, and the strange, terrible beauty of a universe where faith can literally reshape reality, then please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It means more than you know. And it helps me bring you more deep dives into the lore of the 41st millennium. Leave a comment letting me know what you think would happen next. Would Der Emperor eventually achieve true godhood? Would the Imperium find a way to destroy him? Would the Chaos Gods intervene? Or would something even stranger occur? Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, the only limit on power is the strength of your belief. And nobody, but nobody, believes harder than an orc. But to truly grasp the magnitude of what is unfolding on the psychic level, we need to step back from the immediate events and consider the architecture of belief in the Warhammer 40,000 universe from a much wider angle. Because what Der Emperor is doing, whether he understands it or not, is exploiting a vulnerability in the metaphysics of the galaxy that no one, not the Imperium, not the Chaos Gods, not even the Emperor himself, ever anticipated. Consider the way faith works in the Imperium. It is not a passive thing, not a quiet private relationship between an individual and their god. Imperial faith is industrial. It is organized on a scale that dwarfs any religious institution that has ever existed in human history. The ecclesiarchy maintains millions of cathedrals and billions of smaller shrines across the Imperium's million worlds. Every day, trillions of human beings begin their morning with a prayer to the God Emperor, and every night, they end it with another. The accumulated psychic weight of all those prayers, all those candles lit, all those hymns sung, and all those acts of devotion performed across 10,000 years of unbroken religious tradition has created a psychic structure in the warp of almost unimaginable complexity. Think of it as a river. Not a single river, but a vast network of tributaries, streams, and channels, all flowing in the same direction. Every individual prayer is a drop of water. A single drop is nothing. But trillions of drops, flowing continuously for 10 millennia, have carved a canyon in the warp so deep and so wide that it has become a permanent feature of the immaterial landscape. This is the river of faith that sustains the Emperor. It feeds his psychic presence, powers his ongoing battle against chaos, and maintains the Astronomican's light. Without it, the Emperor would still exist. He was a being of transcendent power before anyone worshipped him. But the river gives him reach. It gives him endurance. It gives him the ability to project his will across a galaxy-spanning civilization in ways that his personal power alone, vast as it is, might not be able to sustain after 10,000 years of continuous psychic exertion on the Golden Throne. Now consider what Da Emperor is doing to that river. He is not diverting it, not yet. The amount of faith he is intercepting, even after years of expansion and the conversion of hundreds of millions of humans, is a tiny fraction of the total psychic energy flowing into the Emperor's network. It is a cupful of water stolen from an ocean. The Emperor would not notice it any more than a man would notice a single grain of sand removed from a beach. But rivers start small. Every ocean was once a trickle. And the trickle that the Emperor has created is growing at an exponential rate, because the Gestalt field does not just receive belief, it amplifies it. Every orc who follows the Emperor is not just a believer. He is a psychic amplifier, a living battery that takes the raw energy of his belief and broadcasts it at a frequency and intensity that no human worshipper can match. A single orc's contribution to the Emperor's psychic construct is worth, in raw psychic terms, the prayers of thousands of human devotees. And the Emperor has billions of orc followers. The mathematics of this are terrifying. If the trend continues, if the Emperor's empire keeps growing at its current rate, there will come a point, perhaps within a few centuries, perhaps sooner, where the psychic energy flowing into his warp construct equals the psychic energy flowing into the Emperor's network from a significant portion of the Imperium. Not the whole Imperium. That would require a force that even the orcs cannot generate. But a portion, a meaningful fraction, enough to cause real damage to the Golden Network if it were suddenly withdrawn, or worse, redirected. And here is the thing that makes this scenario particularly insidious. The psychic energy generated by Da Emperor's followers is not just orc energy. It is hybrid energy, that golden-green frequency that the Weird Boys and the Psychers and the Astropaths have all detected. It resonates with the Emperor's network because it is, in part, made from the same stuff. The human faith that Da Emperor has intercepted. He, combined with the orc Gestalt field's amplification, produces a psychic frequency that is close enough to the Emperor's own to create interference patterns in the warp. Interference patterns. Think about what that means. When two waves of similar frequency overlap, they can either reinforce each other or cancel each other out, depending on their alignment. If Da Emperor's psychic broadcast aligns with the Emperor's, it could actually strengthen the Golden Network, adding power to the Astronomican and reinforcing the psychic wards that keep chaos at bay. But if it misaligns, even slightly, it could create dead zones in the Emperor's psychic coverage, areas where the Astronomican's light flickers and dims, where the wards against chaos weaken, where demons can press closer to real space than they have in millennia. Worth the potential for catastrophe is almost beyond calculation. And Da Emperor is not trying to create catastrophe. He is not a chaos agent or a deliberate enemy of the Imperium. He is an orc who genuinely believes he is the Emperor and who is doing his best within the limits of his alien intelligence to act like it. He is, in his own utterly warped way, trying to do what the Emperor does: protect his people, expand his domain, fight the enemies of his empire. The fact that his people are orcs and his domain is built on conquered imperial worlds, and his enemies include the very Imperium he is emulating, is an irony so dark and so deep that it could swallow stars. Let us also consider what the Eldar make of all this, because the Eldar perspective adds yet another layer of complexity to an already impossibly complicated situation. Or the Eldari, those ancient and declining architects of psychic civilization, have been watching the orcs with a mixture of contempt and carefully concealed terror for millions of years. They know, better than anyone else in the galaxy, what the orc gestalt field is capable of. They remember the Krork, the orcs' ancestors, who fought alongside the Elder during the war in heaven, and whose psychic potential, fully awakened and properly directed by the Old Ones, was enough to challenge the Necrons and the Citan themselves. The modern orcs are a diminished echo of what the Krork once were. Their psychic field is a fraction of its original power. Their intelligence, their organization, their capacity for coordinated action. Yes, all of these have degraded over the millions of years since the Old Ones vanished, and the Krork were left to devolve without guidance. The Eldar know this, and it is one of the few things about the current state of the galaxy that gives them comfort. The orcs are dangerous, yes, but they are not what they could be. They are not what they were designed to be. The Emperor changes that calculus. When word of the orc anomaly reaches the craft worlds, carried by the whispers of farseers who have seen troubling visions in the currents of the warp, the reaction among the Eldari is one of immediate and intense alarm. Not because of the orc himself, formidable as he may be, and not because of the theological implications for the Imperium, which the Eldar regard with the detached amusement of a species that has been dealing with gods and their worship for far longer than humanity has existed. The alarm comes from what Da Emperor represents in terms of orc potential. Because what is happening on that frontier world and its expanding sphere of influence is, in a very real sense, the orcs waking up. Not fully. Not the way the Krork were awake during the war in heaven, when every orc in the galaxy operated as a coordinated unit directed by the Old One's psychic commands. But partially, significantly. The organization, the strategic thinking, the ability to suppress internal conflict and channel the species' tremendous psychic energy toward a unified purpose, these are all echoes of the Krork's original design. Da Emperor is not just claiming to be the emperor of mankind, as he is, inadvertently, fulfilling a function that the Old Ones built into the orc species 65 million years ago, the function of leadership. True leadership. The kind of leadership that can transform a species of brawling fungal organisms into a galactic superpower. The elder farseers, peering into the possible futures that branch out from this moment, see timelines that make them physically ill. They see Da Emperor growing in power until the gestalt field reaches a critical threshold. They see the orc species, triggered by the resonance of a fully activated leadership function, beginning to change on a galactic scale. They see orcs everywhere, on every world, in every system, feeling the pull of the golden green light and responding to it, not with the mindless obedience of slaves, but with the purposeful coordination of soldiers who know, for the first time in 65 million years, exactly what they are fighting for. They see, in the worst of these futures, the emergence of a new Krork civilization, not the crude, disorganized empire of modern orcs, but something approaching the original design. A species awakened to its full potential, unified under a single will, directed by a psychic field powerful enough to reshape reality on a galactic scale. And at the center of it all, seated on a golden green throne that spans the warp and real space alike, a being that was once an orc and is now something for which the Eldar have no name. The farseers debate furiously among themselves about how to respond. Some advocate immediate intervention, arguing that the threat must be eliminated before it can reach the tipping point that their visions predict. Others counsel patience, pointing out that the orcs' claim to the Emperor's identity could, if properly manipulated, actually weaken the Imperium by sowing theological confusion and redirecting human faith away from the Golden Throne. A weakened Imperium might serve Eldar interests in certain scenarios, particularly those that involve the Eldar maneuvering other species into bearing the brunt of the coming conflicts. A third faction, smaller and more radical, suggests something that the others find deeply uncomfortable. They propose making contact with the Emperor, not to fight him or manipulate him, but to study him. To understand exactly what the Gestalt field is doing, and how the Orc's belief is being translated into genuine psychic power. Because if the mechanism can be understood, it might be applicable to other situations. The Eldar have their own gods, or had them before the fall of their civilization birthed Slaanesh and shattered their pantheon. The god Inead, the deity of death, who might one day have the power to destroy Slaanesh and free the Eldar from their curse, is still being born, slowly coalescing from the collective psychic energy of every Eldar who dies and whose spirit stone is preserved. If the mechanism by which Da Emperor is achieving apotheosis could be understood and replicated, might it be possible to accelerate Inead's birth? The debate is never resolved. The Eldar, true to form, cannot agree on a unified course of action, and their response to the Viridian heresy remains fragmented and contradictory. Some craft worlds send kill teams to eliminate key figures in Da Emperor's empire, hoping to disrupt the Gestalt field's coherence without engaging the Orc himself. Others send observers, ranger scouts, and disguised warlocks who monitor the situation from a distance and report back to their farseers. At least one craft world, rumored to be Ulthwi, makes indirect contact with the Inquisition and offers intelligence on the Orc anomaly, though the Inquisitor who receives this intelligence spends the rest of her career wondering whether the information was genuine or an elaborate Eldar deception. Now let us turn our attention inward, into the heart of Da Emperor's growing civilization. One, because what is happening there is in many ways more remarkable than the military campaigns and psychic phenomena that have attracted the galaxy's attention. Remember that the Orcs were designed as a complete ecosystem. The Old Ones did not just create warriors, they created an entire support structure encoded into the species' DNA that allows Orc civilization to function without external infrastructure. Mech boys build and maintain technology. Pain boys provide medical care. Weird boys channel psychic energy. Gretchen handle administration and manual labor. Snotlings perform the most basic tasks. And the Orcs themselves, the warriors, do what they do best: fight. Under normal circumstances, this system produces a civilization that is functional but crude, capable of waging war across the stars, but incapable of the kind of sustained, an organized governance that defines the Imperium or the Eldar Empire or any other galaxy-spanning civilization. The Orcs lack the patience for bureaucracy, the sophistication for diplomacy, and the foresight for long-term planning. Their empires rise fast and fall faster, torn apart by the internal competition that is both the strength and the weakness of greenskin society. But under Da Emperor's influence, the system is operating differently. The Gestalt field, shaped by his belief that he is the emperor of a mighty empire, is activating capabilities in the Orc subspecies that have lain dormant for millions of years. The mech boys are not just building weapons, they are building infrastructure, power systems, water purification, communication networks, manufacturing facilities that produce standardized equipment, rather than the one-off custom creations that Orc mechs typically favor. The designs are still recognizably Orc, crude and robust and overbuilt, but they work with a reliability that is unprecedented in greenskin engineering. The Gretchen, those small, cunning creatures who have always been the unsung backbone of Orc society, are experiencing a renaissance. Under the influence of the Gestalt field, their natural intelligence and organizational ability have been amplified to the point where they are performing functions that would be recognizable to any imperial administrator. They are collecting taxes in the form of teeth and salvage. They are conducting censuses. They are maintaining records of military strength, resource allocation, and territorial boundaries. Whereas one particularly ambitious Gretchen has established something that can only be described as a postal service, using trained squigs to carry messages between settlements. The human populations under the Emperor's rule are, against all expectations, not uniformly miserable. They are certainly not free. They are subjects of a Xenos empire, laboring under conditions that the Imperium would rightly condemn as slavery. But the conditions under the Emperor are, in many cases, not dramatically worse than the conditions under imperial rule. The labor is hard. The food is adequate but unappetizing. The constant proximity to orcs is stressful and occasionally dangerous. But there is an order to it, a predictability, that some of the human subjects, particularly those who came from the more oppressive and chaotic corners of the Imperium, find almost comforting. And then there is the golden light, that warm, protective psychic field that surrounds every settlement in the Emperor's empire, banishing nightmares and calming fears and creating a sense of safety that many of these humans have never experienced before. It is not the Emperor's light. The trained psyker would know that in an instant. But for the average Imperial citizen, whose psychic sensitivity extends no further than a vague feeling of comfort when they pray and a vague feeling of dread when they do not, it is close enough to soothe, close enough to inspire, close enough to believe in. Some of the humans resist, of course. There are those whose faith is strong enough, whose devotion to the true Emperor is deep enough that no Xenos imitation can deceive them. These individuals organize underground resistance cells, sabotage Orc infrastructure, and attempt to communicate with the wider Imperium through whatever means they can find. They are the heroes of this story, or they would be if this were a simpler narrative. In the grim darkness of the far future, even heroism is complicated, because the resistors face a terrible moral dilemma. They know that the Emperor is not the Emperor. They can feel the wrongness in the golden light, the alien quality that marks it as counterfeit. But they can also see the effects that the light has on the people around them, the reduction in crime, the increase in community cohesion, the decline in mental illness and despair. The golden light, false though it may be, is providing the human population with a quality of spiritual care that many imperial worlds, buried under the weight of 10,000 years of bureaucratic decay and institutional cruelty, have long since ceased to provide. Is it better to live under a false god who provides genuine comfort, or to fight for a true God whose institutions have long since ceased to care about the welfare of individual believers? This is the question that haunts the resistance, and it is a question that has no clean answer. In the end, most of them choose to fight, because faith is not about comfort. Faith is about truth, and the truth, however painful, is that the green-skinned giant on the golden throne is not the emperor of mankind, no matter how brightly he glows. But the seed of doubt has been planted, and it will grow, not just on the worlds under the Emperor's direct control, but everywhere that word of his existence spreads. The Imperium is a civilization held together by faith, and faith is a fragile thing. It does not take much to crack it. A whisper, a question, a single moment of uncertainty in the mind of a believer who has been taught their entire life that the Emperor is unique and irreplaceable, and that his light can come from no other source. If the Emperor's light can shine from the eyes of an orc, then what is the Emperor? This question, more than any army or any weapon or any psychic power, is the most dangerous thing that the Emperor has unleashed upon the galaxy. It is a question that cannot be answered without either destroying the orc or destroying the foundations of the imperial faith. And in a universe where faith is the only thing standing between humanity and annihilation, that is a choice that no one wants to make. While there is one more aspect of this scenario that deserves careful examination before we reach our final conclusions, and it concerns the relationship between the Emperor and his own orc followers on a psychological level that goes beyond the simple mechanics of the Gestalt field. Consider what it means for an orc to follow a leader who claims to be something other than an orc. Under normal circumstances, this would be impossible. Orc society is rigidly hierarchical, but also deeply insular. Orcs follow the biggest orc, not the biggest anything, the biggest orc. The idea of an orc subordinating himself to a non-orc is anathema to the greenskin psyche. Even the rare cases of orc mercenaries working alongside other species are characterized by the orcs viewing their employers as useful sources of good fights, rather than genuine authority figures. But the Emperor's followers do not see him as a non-orc. This is the crucial psychological nuance that makes the whole scenario work. In their minds, shaped by the Gestalt field and their own inability to experience cognitive dissonance, the Emperor is simultaneously an orc and the Emperor. He is the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful being they have ever encountered, which makes him the natural leader by orc standards. He is also, in their understanding, the being that the humans worship as a god, which makes him something even more impressive. The two identities do not conflict because the orc mind does not allow them to conflict, and he is both, at the same time, without contradiction. This psychological flexibility produces some fascinating cultural developments within the empire. The orcs have begun incorporating elements of imperial culture into their own practices, but filtered through their uniquely greenskin perspective. They build shrines, crude affairs of scrap metal and bone, but shrines nonetheless. They develop rituals, repetitive behaviors performed before battle that serve the same psychological function as imperial prayers. They even develop a crude written language, based partly on orc glyphs and partly on bastardized imperial symbols, that allows them to record their history and the Emperor's pronouncements in a permanent form. The most striking cultural development is the emergence of an orc priestly caste, not the weird boys, who serve a different function, but a new type of odd boy that has never been documented before. These orcs, whom the others call preacher boys, develop an instinctive understanding of ritual, ceremony, and the power of words to inspire belief. They stand before assembled mobs and deliver speeches that are part battle exhortation, part religious sermon, and part stand-up comedy, whipping their audiences into a frenzy of devotion and martial enthusiasm that produces surges in the Gestalt field so powerful that nearby weird boys have to be physically restrained from detonating. The preacher boys are, in a very real sense, the orc equivalent of the ecclesiarchy's preachers. Here they perform the same function, translating the abstract concept of divine authority into an emotional experience that binds a community together and motivates them to act in the service of their god. The fact that their god is a 20-foot-tall, green-skinned fungal organism rather than a withered corpse on a golden chair is, from a purely functional perspective, irrelevant. The mechanism is the same, the belief is the same, the power is the same, and this is perhaps the most unsettling lesson that the Emperor's existence teaches us about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. In the end, gods are not made from divinity, they are made from belief, from faith, from the psychic energy generated when enough minds focus on the same idea with enough conviction. The Emperor became a god not because of who he was, but because of what others believed him to be. And if the same process can be replicated by an orc with a vision and an unshakable belief in his own identity, then the entire theological framework upon which the Imperium rests is not a framework at all. It is a mirror, and mirrors can reflect anything. This does not diminish the Emperor. He is still the most powerful human psyker ever born, still the being who fought the Chaos Gods to a standstill and held shut the breach in reality that would have consumed terror, still the light that guides humanity through the darkness of the warp. But it does suggest that his divinity, the aspect of his existence that the Imperium most depends upon, is not uniquely his. It is a quality that emerges from the relationship between a consciousness and those who believe in it. And that quality, in a universe as vast and strange and psychically turbulent as the one that Warhammer 40,000 depicts, can manifest in places and forms that no one ever expected. On a golden throne, in a green skin, with absolute, unwavering, beautifully impossible belief. And that is why the story of the Emperor This ridiculous, absurd, wonderful, terrifying hypothetical about an orc who decides he is the god emperor of mankind is not really a story about orcs at all. It is a story about faith, about what faith can do when it is unshackled from doubt, about what happens when belief, pure and total and undiluted by the skepticism and fear that plague more sophisticated minds, is given the tools to reshape reality, about the terrible, beautiful power of a mind that knows, with absolute certainty, exactly who it is and what it is meant to do. The emperor of mankind, trapped on his golden throne, surrounded by chanting tech priests and screaming psychers, sustained by the prayers of trillions who have never seen his face and never will, might understand this better than anyone. He might even, in whatever remains of his humanity beneath the accumulated weight of 10 millennia of godhood, appreciate the irony. An orc, of all things. An orc understood the one truth about the universe that the emperor spent his entire life trying to deny. Belief is everything, and everything can be believed. The war continues. It always does. Somewhere in the darkness, the emperor sits upon his throne, golden light spilling from his eyes, green skin gleaming in the light of alien stars. His empire grows, his followers multiply, his legend spreads, and the Gestalt field, that magnificent, ancient, or impossibly powerful engine of collective belief, hums with the energy of billions of minds, all focused on a single, simple, unshakable truth. He is the emperor, he knows it, they know it, and in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, knowing it is enough to make it real. Whether the galaxy survives the implications of that realization is a question for another time. If you have made it this far, thank you. Thank you for sitting with me through this deep dive into one of the wildest and most thought-provoking scenarios the lore of Warhammer 40,000 can offer. If you enjoyed it, if it sparked your imagination or made you see the setting in a new light, please hit that subscribe button. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, your theories, your own ideas about what would happen if the orcs turned their belief towards something this unexpected and this powerful. And until next time, may whatever light you follow, golden or green, guide you safely through the dark. This has been Q on 40,000. Take care of yourselves.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.